Morning, everybody. It's not because of me this time that we are starting a few minutes late. It's the technicians, technical people who needed to sort something out for television.
Thank you, Chair.
When it's me, I take full responsibility.
I know, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
We start today with the evidence of Mr. Francis Callard. Mr. Callard has prepared a statement and annexures. They spent 3 files. The 2 big arch lever files, we have taken the liberty of marking BB4, small a in brackets, BB4B, the second file. And Chair, you should have, together with those files, a black folder marked BB4C. I will talk to that folder in a short while. Yes, Chair, the back is black. That's the side I'm using to. I had no better way of describing it, Chair. And that would be BB4C.
The lever arch file containing Mr. Callan's statement will be marked Exhibit BB4A, and the other lever arch file will be marked Exhibit BB4B. And
at this juncture, may I address myself to the black folder, if I may call it that still? The Chair will notice that that is marked supplementary statement.
Where is that? It's certainly not on the outside.
Unfortunately not. At page, the index of that bundle, the description is supplementary statement of Mr. Francis Quentin Callard.
The folder which has got Mr. Callan's supplementary statement will be marked Exhibit BB4C.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Before I ask for the swearing in of Mr. Callard, I would like to address the Chair on BB4C.
Oh, I'm sorry, I may have pronounced his surname correctly. Mr. Callard, I'm sorry, I think I may have said Calland. I apologize. Thank you,
Chair. File BB4C, the supplementary, it has got a statement and about 9 annexures. I would like to point out that there are no factual allegations advanced in the supplementary statement. The purpose of the statement is to introduce further documents that Mr. Callard had omitted in his main statement. So we will refer to those extra annexures as and when they arise in the course of delivery of his testimony.
Yeah, that's
Thank
fine.
you, Chair. Against that background, may I ask for Mr. Callard to be sworn in?
Yes.
Please state your full names for the record.
Francis Quentin Callard.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
No,
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that the evidence that you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you. Yes, you may
Mr.
proceed.
Callard, you had me referring to your various files when addressing the Chair. You should have, to your left, 2 arch lever files at the spine with your name, and the first one is marked BB4 small a, and the second is marked BB4 B, small b. You should have the little folder. I'll refrain.
You are
from
afraid to say black.
I'm refraining from giving it a color, Chair. Which, as I explained to the Chair, is your supplementary statement together with annexures that has been marked BB4C. Each time I want you to refer to a particular document, I will do so with reference to the file to help, to assist us to locate the document. Now, could you please turn to BB4, have before you BB4A.
I have.
Mr. Callard, do you confirm that you have submitted a statement to this commission?
I do.
And if you could please turn to page 001 of BB4A. Is that your statement? It should run up to page 59.
It is my statement.
And at page 59, do you confirm the signature appearing at the end of that document is your signature?
It is my signature.
Thank you, sir. Now, before I ask you, apologies. Before I ask you to confirm this statement, you have brought to my attention that there are a number of corrections you would like to effect to this statement.
There are.
Can we take this opportunity then to give effect to those corrections, and we shall be led by you in this regard. Please refer to the page, the specific paragraph, and then address yourself to the nature of correction you would like effected.
Thank you. And for the corrections, if we could first turn to page 6, paragraph 26.
Thank you.
That date, April 2012, should read April 2013. In paragraph 26.1, there is the phrase additional 119E. For the sake of clarity and to avoid confusion, please delete the word additional and just read for 119E locomotives. Further on in
I'm sorry, that second correction is in which paragraph?
26.1.
Oh, okay.
The second line.
Second line.
Oh, additional is the,
Yes, it gives the wrong impression that it is added to, but I'm referring
Yes.
actually to an original.
okay, so, but all of these are dealt with in the supplementary or not yet?
No, Chair, they are not dealt with in
Okay,
the supplementary.
Another supplementary will be submitted, which will point the corrections out.
We will do so, Chair.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
And my apologies for the number of them. Also in the same paragraph, I incorrectly spelt the name Mohammadi. That should read Mahommody. I'd further like to correct paragraph 27.1.
Mr. Callard, please
Sorry.
excuse me. In relation to the change to Mr. Mohammadi's name,
Yes.
you would like to change it from Mohamody to
Mohommody. Mohammadi.
Mohammadi.
Yes.
Or
Mohammadi.
E instead of
Instead
the
of O.
second O.
Sorry, E. Apologies.
So you have Mohammadi right now, and you'd like to change it to Mohammadi.
D. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Please
you.
continue.
Further to paragraph 27.1, please change that 119E to 11019E. If I may further go to page 9, please, at the bottom, paragraph 40.6.
Yes,
And that should read to the statement para 90 and not page 90.
thank you.
To page 15, paragraph 62, the top line, it's Natasha McMahon, and the McMahon is spelled incorrectly. The correct spelling is MC, capital M, AHON.
Thank you.
If I may turn to page 20, please. The top paragraph, the numbering's on the previous page. There should be a full stop on the third line after 38,146 million. There's a full stop missing.
That last one is on page
Page 20.
20. And on paragraph?
The top paragraph, it is paragraph 83,
Yes.
but it's just before paragraph 84.
Yes, okay. Just repeat the correction again.
It is a full stop after 38,146 million. Various amendments were requested. There's a full stop
Or
for various.
38 point. That's what you mean.
38.146,
Yes.
full stop,
Oh, the full stop comes after?
after million.
Oh, okay. Thank you. But there's also a dot or point after 38. Huh?
Yes,
There should be. Oh,
should read 38.146 million.
yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you, Mr. Callard. You may proceed.
Thank you. Page 22, please, paragraph 102. For clarity, that should read in April 2013. Just to avoid confusion, paragraph 102 reads in April 2013.
Yes?
Paragraph, page 26, paragraph 105.4, first line, 18 April, please change 2014 to 2013.
Is that at page 26?
That's at page 26. Page 27,
Just a second.
Sorry.
Chair, have you located page 26?
No, I've decided not
Stop.
to continue.
Okay.
There are too many.
my apologies, they are.
I think what we
dates.
should do is a supplementary statement or affidavit must be done as soon as possible. And then one must just find a way to have something on the May statement that will indicate that one must go to the supplementary statement to get the correction. So if it's fine with you, he can continue and finish.
Yes, Chair.
Otherwise, I think as and when, as he proceeds with his evidence, he
Then we
can
will
just
point
point out again that in regard to certain paragraphs, there is an error, and then, so that will be on the record as well.
We'll do that, Chair. As
Yeah.
we get to the point where a correction is required, particularly in regard to a date, because that is
Yes.
very relevant.
Yes,
We will point it out at that juncture.
yes,
When, on Monday, we will bring a full supplementary
Yeah.
listing all the corrections that have been effected.
yes,
We will
yeah.
do so, Chair.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
We'll then leave the corrections aside for now, Mr. Callard, as you have understood. We will effect them as we go along, should the need arise.
Thank you.
Before we get into your topic for the day, could you please give the Chair a sense of your background, your service in Transnet, positions you have held, and basically, in brief, what your functions have been over the period?
Thank you. Well, I qualified with a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering in 1970, and I joined Transnet in October 70 as an assistant engineer. I had some service with Transnet for a period of some 40 odd years, and I retired in April 2012. I was subsequently contracted back to Transnet for a further period of 5 years.
No, I just wanted to say, it looks like you know only one employer.
That is true.
Okay.
Many aspects of that employer, but one employer. During my some 45 years with Transnet, I had various portfolios in freight rail, and I gained significant experience in both railway signaling, managing major new works, projects, information technology, railway operations, railway infrastructure business, restructuring and engineering, business strategy, and I ended my career with the development of business cases for major capital projects, covering the technical and financial justification and the viability of those projects. These business cases covered in particular the requirement and the financial scope of capital related to the acquisition and maintenance of infrastructure, locomotives and wagons. And that was really what occupied my last 5 years with Transnet.
And just to complete that, what do you currently do? Are you employed?
Well, I've been contracted by M&S attorneys, and I assist them with specialized railway expertise in the course of their investigation into the acquisition of the locomotives. And this was in terms of a mandate given to them by the Transnet Board of Directors. And I did another Transnet-related investigation at the request of Transnet, which will appear later in my evidence.
Thank you. At your paragraph 1.1, you provide the scope of your testimony before the chair today.
That is so, yes.
We know that the investigations into Transnet are very wide and broad, but your testimony will be limited only to two main issues. Could you identify them for the record?
Certainly, and those two issues are the acquisition of the 121E locomotives and the acquisition of the 1064, as we will call it, diesel and electric locomotives.
Thank you. Having covered those aspects then, Mr. Callard, that brings us to page 3 of your statement. And you start at paragraph 11 with the background to Transnet Freight Rail. What would you like to bring to the chair's attention in respect thereto?
I'd really just like to bring to the attention that Transnet is an operating Transnet Freight Rail. It's an operating division of the Transnet state-owned company limited, and it is recognized as the national freight rail carrier in South Africa. As a freight rail company, it's a heavy haul freight rail company. It specializes in the transportation of freight with an extensive rail network, of which the details are given there. And with its extent, it covers some 80% of Africa's total rail network. For context to what will follow, in 2013-14, and I quote the figures from then, freight rail transported 208.5 million tons, which was made up of, I will round the figures, 53 million tons of export iron ore through Saldanha. We will not be addressing that at all. 62 million tons of coal through what we call the export coal line through Richards Bay, but of particular importance, which will follow, will be the 86 million tons of general freight and where that moves. This is quite extensive. It represents some 14% of South Africa's rail tonnage. The details of the network below, but what I'd just like to bring more to the fore is that freight rail has approximately 2,132 locomotives at that time, and that is relevant to the 1064 process.
You have included in your supplementary statement some pictures, and if I may call for Annexure A to the supplementary affidavit, and if you could explain that in relation to your paragraphs 13 and 14, just so we have proper context before we deal with your evidence.
Thank you. If we could,
Chair, that will be in your BB4C at page 5.
Thank you. C, you said.
BB4C, page 5.
Yeah. Thank you.
We are at page 5.
We are at
Annexure
page 5. Thank you. I'd like to point out that this slide depicts broadly the network as I described it. On the left-hand side, we'll have the iron ore line. On the right-hand side, we have the coal line. The orange network is the general freight network, and the blue network is the branch line. What I would particularly like to highlight from this, because it becomes relevant later, is the concept of axle loading. The iron ore line, you'll see, has an axle loading of 30 tons, and the concept of axle loading is the picture on the top left-hand corner, where it relates to the weight of the axle on the rail and the point contact. The rail network, the rail infrastructure, and supporting infrastructure is designed to support an axle loading mass. And this relates to the weight of the locomotives and the weight of the wagons. And this is a one delineation of the network. The coal line, as we will see, has an axle loading of 26 tons per axle. The general freight network, which is the brown, has an axle loading of 20 tons per network, and the branch line, sorry, the one in the statement has is between 16 to 18.5 tons per axle, which we will see on the towards the bottom right-hand side. Of critical importance to this is that a locomotive and or wagon may not traverse that part of the network with a lower axle loading than it has. So, for example, a 26-ton locomotive cannot traverse the 20-ton general freight network. A 20-ton wagon or locomotive from general freight cannot traverse a branch line with an axle loading of 18.5. The converse, of course, is different, because a wagon or locomotive with a lesser axle loading can, of course, traverse a network with a higher axle loading. So you can put a 20-ton wagon on a 26-ton network. That is not a problem. It's the going down that is the problem. A distinction which is not on the slide is that locomotives for the general freight network are at 22 tons per axle. This is a specific dispensation for the locos only. It does not hold for the wagons. The importance of this slide is it delineates specific boundaries of operations for various categories of rolling stock. That boundary definition will become more clear and important later. If I may move to the second slide.
Yes.
The network is also characterized by the type of traction across the network. We have various types of locomotives. The primary distinction between are they diesel or electric, and the electrics are further subdivided into categories of are they direct current locomotives, which are the older type, alternating current locomotives of the newer type, and even the new locomotives are differentiated into 25 kilovolt alternating current or 50 kilovolt alternating current. Of prime consideration here for the general freight network is the earlier locomotives were of one particular voltage. So a 3 kV DC locomotive could only traverse what we would see as the purple line, purple-blue line, and it would be limited to that. A 25 kV AC locomotive could only travel a 25 kV network, and it couldn't move over to a DC network. The newer locomotives, and particularly those of the 1064, the electric locomotives were specified as dual voltage locomotives, enabling them to traverse both the direct current and the alternating current networks, the DC or the AC network, giving them far greater operational flexibility. I think it goes without saying that a diesel locomotive can go anywhere subject to its axle loading.
If I may go back to your Annexure A, and just so we understand, as you go through your testimony, if we could go back, would it be a correct summation of your testimony thus far that in order to transport coal, you require a 26-ton axle to transport coal?
Yes, a feature that is the more powerful the locomotive, the more heavier it has to be. That has to do with how the wheels grip the rails. So the more powerful the locomotive, the more heavier. Given that the coal line runs 200 wagon trains, they have an approximate weight of between 16,000 or 16,500 tons. They have more powerful locomotives than those which operate on the general freight line at 22 tons per axle. So there is a very definite power difference between the types of locomotives over the various sectors of the network.
Thank you. At page 4, you then provide a very brief history of the acquisition of locomotives by Transnet, in particular for freight. Could you take the chairperson through that aspect of your testimony?
Certainly, and I will talk to the paragraphs very briefly. Around 2008-9, I was tasked by Mr. Siyabonga Gama, then the Freight Rail Chief Executive, to develop a locomotive fleet plan for freight rail. If I may add that the last time we had bought a locomotive for general freight was in 1992. So there had been a significant period since we had bought locomotives for general freight, and replacement was becoming quite urgent. And I developed this initial fleet plan concept with various experts from freight rail. In 2010, I handed over responsibility for this fleet plan to Juan Vilvanaya, a colleague, a senior manager, who developed a 5-year plan for locomotives which was matched to market requirements. The reason it's matched to market requirements, locomotives are expensive assets. You only want as few as necessary to convey the related tonnage. One does not want to have too many locomotives or too few. So market requirements and locomotives need to be very closely matched. In 2011, April 2011, this 5-year plan was presented to the Transnet board, and it recommended that we procure 776 locomotives. And it was predicated that the market would then be 155.8 million tons over this 5-year period. I contrast this to the tonnage that general freight currently conveyed then, which I mentioned earlier, of 86 million tons. One can see there was a significant growth. The board approved this modernization plan at a cost then of some 23.6 billion, subject to submission of a holistic funding plan, given the significant amount of money. There was then, around that time, a change in the strategic thinking within the organization. Because the railways are a very capital-intensive industry, we had the policy or strategy of responding to market demand. That is, if a mine were to open up a new mine, for example, on the coal line, one would say, okay, if you're going to open up this mine in 5 years' time, we will increase the capacity of the railways and we will procure the rolling stock and the wagons to meet your requirements when the mine is ready for production. But we had also lost significant traffic to road since 1992. And it was a strategy from the Department for Public Enterprise that we return road traffic to rail. And there was considerable traffic, rail-friendly traffic, that was running on the road. This led to the change in strategy that instead of responding to market demand, to change the strategy to create the infrastructure and procure the assets, to create capacity, to absorb demand that was out there, so that we were not seen to be holding up infrastructure or industry in conveying traffic, but to say we had the capacity to create traffic. It was this creating capacity, as I said, to capture the rail-friendly traffic that was already conveyed by road, and gave the origin of the MDS.
Mr. Callard, just the change of strategy.
Yes.
The old one, where you would respond to market demand,
Yes.
is something that's probably applied across the board or most of the time. But but I'm wondering where you change it. I mean, in terms of the old one, as you pointed out, if there was somebody who wanted to open a coal mine, you would respond to that and then make sure that there would be a railway line and so on. So if you changed it, how would that work at a practical level? You wouldn't build a railway line in the hope that somebody would would open
No, no.
So
No,
how would
not
it
at that
work
level.
at a practical level? How would it work?
If I may then differentiate, for a coal mine, for example, there would be joint long-term planning, because a coal mine also takes 5 years or 3 or 4 years to come to fruition. One would plan the railway links and the assets over a significant period and have them all in place so that when the coal mine started production, one would have the locomotives available and the wagons available to be able to transport the coal, for example. But there was a lot of criticism from industry of the organization at the time. Industry general, the maize industry, the cement, the container industry, the fuel, petroleum products lines, which said, we want to move traffic by rail, but you do not have sufficient wagons and you keep on telling us you don't have enough locomotives. It is there that the strategy came, well, we need to buy more to create this capacity to absorb what the market was asking us to do.
But that's responding to a market demand.
We were slow to respond to the market demand, if I could put it that way.
Yeah,
We were
because
slow.
I'm trying to understand the distinction between the two. If there are complaints from the market that you don't have capacity and they would actually like to make use of your company and so on, and as a result of those complaints, you want to do something about it to address the capacity issue, you are responding to the market demand as I see it. So I'm trying to understand how a company such as a state-owned entity would, at a practical level, not respond to a market demands, but kind of create, I don't know whether create the demands.
I wish I could answer your question in the detail it requires, Chair.
Yes.
But the market demand strategy to create capacity, essentially it said we would double our available capacity
Yes.
in 7 years.
Yes.
So where our average tonnage had been gradually increasing from around the 70s to the 80 million tons of general freight, and I
Yeah.
stress this was the general freight traffic. The market demand strategy said, we are now going to create capacity to double this tonnage over a period of 7 years. Now that is a significant increase, and that was creating capacity to absorb whatever was there in the market.
So was it this, that you would look at the current situation in the market and then make a projection to say over the next 10 years, what is likely to be the position? Is the position likely to be that there is going to be a lot of demand, and we must then make sure that when that demand reaches that level, we are ready in terms of our capacity?
It's not in my statement, but if I may give a
Yeah.
context to that.
Yeah.
It was around this time, I've said the tonnages, we were conveying about 14% of South Africa's volumes. Around this time, various studies were done of what is the total transport market in South Africa. And that was around that time, it was around 900 million tons. That market was then further subdivided into what is traffic exclusively for road, which rail cannot compete in, what market is exclusively rail, which road cannot compete in, and then there was two segments in between. That of the general freight, which we were doing by rail, which we were in competition with road, and that of the general freight traffic, which was carried by road, which we said should be done by rail, and we could capture that by rail. This was part of that holistic thinking. And this increase or predicted growth from the 80 million tons to this 170 million tons was predicated on capturing that rail-friendly traffic in the total market that was currently conveyed by road within this greater holistic transport market of 900 million tons currently in South Africa. And in that, we included traffic which was conveyed by private companies. For example, major retailers have their own transport fleet, and we couldn't get into that market. But then there were road transport operators who were operating for others, and we wanted to compete and get their slice of the pie, if I may put it that way. And that was how the change in strategy came about.
Thank you. Hopefully it will be clearer later on.
Chair, it will be clearer. We will get to, if I may point out, page 18, where we briefly touch on the this market demand strategy.
Okay.
But he deals with it more by way of criticism, so hopefully it will crystallize at that point, Chair.
That's fine.
Thank you. Then if we could just complete then this section.
Sure. Thank you. Coming back then, this market demand strategy impacted the locomotive fleet plan, and in November 2011, I personally learned that Mr. Garma had presented this fleet plan to the Department of Public Enterprises, and the number of locomotives the locomotive fleet plan was extended from 5 years to 7 years, which forms the basis of the 1064 locomotive fleet plan, increased from 776 to 1064, and the tonnages had increased to from the 155 million tons of paragraph 19, they have now increased to this 176 million tons. So effectively, over a 7-year period, we were predicating a virtual doubling of the growth of general freight. A significant hockey stick effect if you consider the relatively flat line we'd been on and this very rapid increase that we were forecasting.
You indicated that your testimony before the chair today covers two specific acquisitions, the acquisition of 100 and acquisition of the 1064 locomotives.
Correct, yes.
From page 5, you then start with that part of your evidence relating to the acquisition of the 100 locomotives. And we are now at page 5, paragraph 23. And if you could take us through that, we understand from your statement that you will deal with this aspect of your testimony under 4 distinctive headings, which you set out in paragraph 24. If you could take the chair through these issues that you would like to highlight insofar as the acquisition of the 100 locomotives is concerned.
Sure. Thank you. The acquisition of the 1064 locomotives did not proceed as smoothly as we'd initially hoped, and there were some significant delays. Those delays I will talk to later, but if we can accept for the moment that the program was delayed. Because of this delay in the program, and there was an urgent need for tractor power, it said, where can we get locomotives from? Now, there were locomotives on the coal line that were available, could be used on areas of the general freight network, but we said to release those locomotives, we need new locomotives for the coal line. These old locomotives, or these locomotives from the coal line that could be released, were at the end of their economic life, and they were going to be a temporary stopgap into the general freight network while we bought were awaiting for the delivery of the 1064. There was also a need, requirement, vision to standardize the locomotive fleet on the coal line. And if I use the coal line phrase, please, that's generally the line from Ermelo coalfields through to Richards Bay. To standardize that fleet with dual voltage locomotives. As we saw on the network diagram, and perhaps I didn't make it clear, I should have, that the DC network stops at Ermelo, the alternating current network then goes from Ermelo to Richards Bay, and we had to change locomotives at Ermelo. This introduces significant delays in the operation. Dual voltage locomotives, which could travel right through from the coal mine through to Richards Bay Terminal and back to the coal mine, would significantly improve the efficiency of operations. Hence, we wanted to standardize the fleet on dual voltage locomotives. That was the genesis and thinking behind 100 locomotives for the coal export line. And I will show in this one that I prepared a case for these 100 locomotives, that it was unilaterally changed by Transnet Group executives and or freight rail supply chain services to favor CSR.
So, and for the record, CSR is China South Rail.
China South Rail.
Yes.
Yes. There was material, the changes and implications were material, and I submit that the representation that was made to the BADEC committee in respect of the business case I prepared, that it, as it had been changed, was misleading in certain respects. It is also my considered opinion that the confinement to CSR was flawed in concept and execution, and the upfront payments to CSR before the first locomotive was delivered were excessive. That is where I wish to go to.
Okay. Then can you provide us the sequence of events as you set them out from your paragraph 26?
Certainly, thank you. The sequence of events, and if I could go there to 26. I prepared a first business case in April 2013, and please, that is a 2012, which should read 2013, for additional locomotives for the coal line. These were to be dual voltage locomotives, and the initial business case that I first prepared in April was that they go out on open tender. There were various iterations of this business case. It went through changes from initially 100, then it was up to 160, with options to 160 and down. But the key element is that in September, October 2013, I was requested to update this business case for 100 19E type equivalent electric locomotives and 80 diesel export locomotives for the coal export line.
And if I may interject there, the 119E type equivalent electric locomotives are those what we call the 100 coal line locomotives.
Those are the 100 coal line locomotives, yes. The phrase 19E equivalent has particular importance because it was the way of specifying that it was both a dual voltage locomotive, that it had a particular axle loading, as we have seen on the slide, of 26 tons per axle, and that it had a particular power requirement, given that it was to be used for the coal line. It needed to be a higher power locomotive than those we had previously used on general freight.
So, and why do we use the 19E type? What do we mean by 19E type? Is it reference to a specific locomotive? Because you are looking for 119E type equivalent. Could you explain that phrase?
Certainly. We had 110 locomotives on the coal line of a 19E type.
Okay.
We sought to have equivalency of that type with full interoperability with those 110 locomotives. The 110 plus the 100 would have brought us to 210 locomotives as a coal line fleet standardized was the operational vision.
That was the aim of the business plan. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. You may proceed.
So this memorandum was dated the 15th of October. It went through virtually everybody in the organization. It was signed by Mr. Garma, by the Group Supply Chain Officer, then Gary Peter, by the General Manager Capital Integration, Mohammed Mohammadi, and also by then the Group Chief Financial Officer, Anos Singh, and this is referenced in Annexure 1.
If we could then just quickly turn to Annexure 1, because I think beyond this point you deal with specific items arising therefrom. Annexure 1, Chair, would start at your page 70 of BB4A.
Well, I wanted to say something before you started, so you'll have to repeat what you just said.
I will.
I think in the supplementary statement that you will prepare, just make sure that there is something that gives the first names of the persons that the witness gives in paragraph
Indeed, Chair.
26.1, because it refers to Singh,
Just a sentence.
and we don't know, and he has now said it's Mr. Anuj Singh, and then there's Mohammadi, and I was wondering whether it was Mr. Mohammadi.
It was.
Which he has now confirmed, but I think he's mentioning them for the first time, so
Yes,
it's
Chair.
important that the supplementary affidavit clarifies who they really are.
We will definitely do so, Chair. And if
Yes.
then, for the record, if in relation to paragraph 26.1, I may request Mr. Callard to confirm the full names of the people referred thereto for purposes of his testimony for the remainder of the day. You refer in your
Yes.
first line to Gama. Could you please provide his full name?
Certainly, it was Mr. Siyabonga Garma, Chief Executive, Transnet Freight Rail at the time.
At the third line from the bottom of 26.1, you refer to Group Supply Chain Officer Peter. Could you provide his full name?
Certainly, Gary Peter, Group Chief Supply Chain Officer.
And to Mohammadi, where we effected a correction, could you provide the full name?
Mohammed Mohammadi, then Group General Manager, Capital Integration.
And as the chair pointed out, is that the person who testified yesterday, the current acting CEO of Transnet?
It is.
And lastly, you refer to Singh.
Yes, and that was Anosh Singh, then Group Chief Financial Officer.
Okay. And then you refer to Annexure 1, which is where I'd requested that we go to. And Chair, that is at page 70. And these people you have named, you state, all signed this memorandum.
I do.
And if we could turn
I did.
to page 94 of that Annexure A. It would appear to be a signature page.
Hang on, you first said, let's go to page 70.
70, that's where the document starts.
That's the memorandum.
That's a
Okay.
memorandum.
And then we,
Page 94, which is still, the last page of that memorandum is the signature page.
okay. Yes.
And these are the signatures of the people you mentioned at 26.1 signed this memorandum.
Correct.
And the memorandum was then prepared for submission to who?
It was prepared for submission to the Transnet Board and Acquisitions and Disposals Committee, which we refer to as BADC, BADC.
BADC. From paragraph 27,
I'm sorry. The memorandum starting at page 70, which is the one we've just been through, is it the memorandum referred to in paragraph 26.1 of your statement?
That is correct, yes.
Your name doesn't appear at the end of the document, and that's what I want to clarify, because if it was prepared by you, normally one would expect your name at the end. You prepared it for the people who were going to sign it, and then they signed it, but you prepared the memo. That's what you mean.
That is correct.
Okay.
In some cases, our name appears at the bottom, but it generally does not appear on the back page. We prepare it for
Yes.
signature by
Yes.
the relevant officers.
Yes. This particular one, does it appear at the bottom or something?
No, it doesn't.
I just I wanted to be able to understand, because otherwise one looks at it and page 7 it says a memorandum from Mr. Brian Molefe. And so okay, you prepared it for them.
Yes, I was the author of this memorandum.
Yeah, okay.
The prime author.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I then I can just probably add another question to that. The process is you prepare the document, you submit it to the relevant senior people for consideration, and if in agreement they with their pen their signatures. Would that be a correct approach?
Correct.
Thank you. And for the record, this memorandum is dated the 15th of October 2013, so are we to understand that the four people who signed, Mr. Gama, Mr. Peter, Mr. Mahomedi, Mr. Singh, technically were making this proposal to the BADC?
Correct.
At paragraph 27 of your statement, then, you start with the various nitty-gritty of this memorandum. Can we start with 27, and we will cross-refer to the relevant pages in the memorandum as and when the need arises, and take the chair slowly through the issues that you raise here?
Certainly. Thank you. The key points from this memorandum were that it now recommended confinement to Mitsui & Co. African Railway Solutions, which we also refer to commonly as MARS. Sometimes in Mitsui, those names are used interchangeably in various documentations, MARS and Mitsui. And this confinement was predicated on compatibility with the existing 110 19E type locomotives that we had on the coal line, availability of current...
You read 110, is that because of a correction?
That was one of the corrections, yes.
Oh,
We already had a fleet of 110, and we wished to increase the same fleet by 100. For that, or with that, there were facilities available for immediate production without having to establish new facilities. Because it was a known locomotive and currently in use, and it was a relatively new locomotive, having been procured only a few years previously, there was no need to develop a specification, design, and to go through a type testing process before approval of the locomotive and prototype testing. If I may mention there that electric locomotives for freight rail are not bought off the shelf. Electric locomotives particularly are bespoke locomotives. They're designed specifically for our gauge and to our requirements, and they go through an extensive design review, design sign-off phase. From that, they then go through the manufacture of the first prototype for a new type. That first prototype is then put through extensive performance tests. Only then is approval given to proceed with further manufacture of 2 or 3 to make sure all the bugs are ironed out, and only then is full production effectively authorized.
Now,
and this saving in design, type testing, and type approval talks to that.
Okay.
And it also would give us confinement to Mars the fastest possible delivery.
Can we, just so we understand, you indicated earlier that there were certain trains or locomotives that were reaching the end of their economic life.
Yes.
And which would had to be replaced. You just now pointed out to the chairperson that you already had 110 new locomotives in fleet.
Yes.
Can you explain how many required to be retired? When were these 110 acquired when you prepared this memo?
2 parts to that question, and if I may.
For the moment, can you recall when these 110 were acquired?
The 110 were required, the specific dates are there. It was between 2009 to about 2011. I think the contract was signed in 2008. But please,
That's fine.
that's subject to absolute correction.
And just so we are clear, that is not the lot that was reaching the end of its economic life.
No.
Yes.
The lot that were reaching the end of the economic life were what we called the 7E series, the 7E1, 7E2, and 7E3 series, a completely different type of locomotive, a DC-only locomotive.
Okay. You deal with the nature of this 19E type locomotive at page 7, paragraph 27. And the relevance of that particular type of locomotive to the coal division.
Sorry, page 7, paragraph 29.
Paragraph 29.
Yes.
Can you give us an appreciation of this 19E type locomotive and its relevance
Certainly.
to the
By
coal
specifying
division?
it as a 19E type equivalent locomotive, we were in fact specifying that it would be a locomotive of a 26-ton axle loading, that it would have of the order of at least 311 kilonewton tractive effort, yeah, those are the two main characteristics which I have dealt with on the slide, and it would be dual voltage.
Now, you contrast that with reference to your Annexure 1 at paragraph 63 of Annexure 1 to another type of locomotive. You call this one a 20E.
Yes.
Can you give us an understanding? And your paragraph 63 of Annexure 1, where this is dealt with, is at page 81.
Okay, just give me those references again.
I apologize. Mr. Callard has explained to us the 19E and its relevance to the coal division and the fact that it has to be a 26-ton locomotive. In the next paragraph, he then contrasts it with another type of locomotive, which is a 20E. The detail of that comparison is contained in Annexure 1 at paragraph 63.
Annexure 1 is in the same
Annexure 1
bundle.
starts at page 70. And the specific paragraph where he does this comparison is at page 81 of that document, and in particular, paragraph 63.
May I stop?
Okay, yes.
Thank you. And if you could then explain to us the differences between the two and why it is necessary to do this comparison.
Certainly. May I start at the bottom of page 80, please?
Yes. 80.
80, the bottom of page 80.
Yes.
At the bottom of page 80, under 58A type, we describe there essentially what I've said earlier, that the 19E are 26-ton axle, and this says why it was not part of the 1064 process, because the 1064 process were general freight locomotives of 22 tons per axle,
Yes.
setting out why it's a different one. It also sets out delivery. Then, if the argument is accepted that one needs the locomotives, what business cases are required to do will say, first identify and we agree on the need. We then have to assess the various procurement options, which is what point 59 at the bottom of page 11 sets out to do, analysis and implications of procurement options. And so we reasoned to four. The first was go out on tender. We could do nothing.
Yes.
We could confine or extend a contract. We explored the option of extending the current 20E contract for 95 CSR locomotives, or we could lease locomotives. Those were the procurement options which we set out to explore. Paragraph 60 on page 81 spells out the options of going out on tender. Because of the time of the urgency, which there was, and the need to catch up on the delay of the 1064, we argued against going out on tender for this. The do-nothing option. We come particularly, if I may then, to 63,
Yes.
paragraph 63, where we extend the current 20E contract to 95 CSR locomotives, and explain at length, in some length, in this paragraph, why the 95 CSR locomotives were not suitable, nor was it appropriate to extend or the contract or confine the contract to CSR for their 95 locomotives, because for the prime reason, it was not a 22-ton per axle locomotive, it was not a heavy haul locomotive, it was not designed for the coal line, it was specified for general freight. In short, it was not suitable for the coal line, therefore we can't move in that direction.
So, would our understanding then be correct that insofar, as much as we had a manufacturer supplying us with 20E or having recently supplied us with 20A, it's not 20E we required for coal purposes, it's specifically 19E type.
Correct.
Thank you. You may then proceed with the argument you made to, let me say, the argument advanced in the memorandum regarding the basis for confinement, which is what you selected. And in doing so, perhaps, it might be a good place to start at page 82, where you give a definition of confinement as appears in the Procurement Procedures Manual of 2012.
Certainly.
Yes.
Because
Sorry, if I may, before we go there, could you just briefly state what are the requirements for confinement to be invoked in acquisition?
in the business case, where we were now motivating for confinement for electric locomotives, this confinement has to be in terms of the Procurement Procedures Manual, of which an extract is set out under 67 on page 82. There are a number of factors.
I'm just thinking, Ms. Silo,
Chair.
that we have had a few witnesses tell us about what the requirements are for confinement, and whether we shouldn't, he shouldn't just go ahead and then he will talk about them and we would know.
We would be happy to, because we need to go into a bit of detail on the requirement for confinement when we deal with the business case that was eventually signed off and whether or not it complied with confinement. But if that evidence has been led before,
Yes,
we
I
can
think at
perhaps
least,
go into the various.
at least no less than 2 Transnet witnesses have dealt
That's more
with
than
it,
enough, Chair.
You know, yeah, so I know exactly what it is and what the requirements are.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We are happy then to go to the next point.
Obviously, if there is a specific requirement that needs highlighting because of what he will be saying later on, that can
We
be
can cross
highlighted,
refer.
but we don't need to spend too much time on it.
Thank you, Chair. You give the summary of the business case that is advanced in Annexure 1, and you state there that the memorandum recommended confinement to Mitsui
Yes.
for the acquisition of the 19E type
Yes.
locomotives. Could you then take the chair through the basis on which you recommended confinement to Mitsui?
Certainly. I won't deal with, briefly, there was the urgency, which is addressed in the memorandum. The suppliers, limited number of suppliers, we address. For reasons, to Mitsui, we talked to the reasons of standardization and compatibility with existing goods or services, considering that we already had 110 and we wanted to just expand the current fleet. So we argued, the memorandum argues, that C was fully met. D, we spoke to the point where the goods or services are highly specialized and largely identical to those previously executed, and it ticked all those boxes. One of the things which we argued also against the 95 is no 95 loco had been delivered. It may have been on order, but it had not been delivered, so it had not been executed. It did not tick that box. But for C and D, plus the speed with which they could be procured, with the facilities already being available, it addressed the urgency, if that's sufficient summary.
And so the basis for confining to Mitsui was that, was as listed in paragraph 69 at page 83
Correct.
of the annexure, to say these are the grounds on which we believe that in addressing the urgency, we are able to do so through confining to Mitsui.
Correct, and they speak to the elements earlier because it was a known locomotive, known type. We did not have the design, testing, and prototyping issues. We'd been through the teasing phase. The production line was available in point B. Crew and drivers were already trained. There was no need to cross-train them for a new type of locomotive. And D argued that confinement was the quickest delivery, making use of existing facilities.
Do you know
for the
what,
locomotives.
you prepared the memorandum, it was signed as you indicated. Do you know what happened to this memorandum thereafter?
Yes, it was at the BADC meeting. It was withdrawn by Mr. Malefi.
At what meeting was it withdrawn by
Sorry.
him?
Mr. Callard? Mr. Callard,
Yes,
the chair has got a question for you.
I was just getting the
You are
date,
looking for
which is why.
Okay, no, that's fine, yes.
I believe the BADC meeting was on the, on the 21st of October was the BADC meeting. And
Oh, okay, I think that's the word I was looking for.
yes,
Or Bedek, if I may, Chair, if the chair has regard to paragraph 32,
two,
Yes,
I think it's how employees at Transnet tend to deal with,
my apologies.
it's BADC.
yes, BADC, yes.
And,
Okay.
and they
Yeah.
in short call it Bedek.
Yeah,
The Board Acquisitions and Development Council meeting
Yes.
was held on the 21st of October.
okay,
This memorandum, having been signed beforehand through all these parties, was ready for presentation to that
Yes.
meeting.
yes,
I was at that meeting, ready actually not to talk to this memorandum, but to the 1064 locomotives.
Yes.
Mr. Garma was not at the meeting. Mr. Gianni was going to come. I was on standby.
If I may just interject, you say Mr. Gianni, and who now is Mr. Gianni?
Sorry, Mr. Tamasankwa Gianni,
And he was,
Chief Procurement Officer, Transnet Freight Rail.
so are you stating that he was to talk to this memorandum?
I did not know at the
Okay.
time. I was informed of that later.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I was there when I received an SMS from Mr. Garma while I was in the meeting hall, and it said that Mr. Malefi, the group, Mr. Brian Malefi, then Group Chief Executive of Transnet Limited, had withdrawn the memorandum, and I was to politely get out of that meeting. That is, SMS was detailed in Annexure 2.
but you said you were, as far as you understood, you were attending the meeting in order to deal with another memorandum, not
Correct.
this one.
Yes.
But the SMS from Mr. Gama to you while you were waiting at the venue was that the memorandum to which you were not going to be the one talking had been withdrawn, but he would then said you must not attend the meeting anymore. That's what you say. You say
That's what he said. May I refer to page 96, the
Absolutely.
SMS messages?
What page is that?
96, you
Page
said?
96.
Thank you.
That your annexure FC2.
Annexure FC2.
We've located it, yes, Chair.
Thank you. It was a confusing morning. The SMS read, and I'm reading from the top of page 96, please get out that boardroom. Tommy is coming to talk about 1064 locomotives. The 1064 has been withdrawn, so I'm not sure why you are there.
Correction, you said 164, it's 160?
The 160 has been withdrawn. So, thank you. So I'm not sure why you are there.
So you testified that you were scheduled to speak on the 1064?
I was on standby.
Standby
I
to
thought
do
I was
that.
going there believing I was on standby to speak to the 1064.
And then this memorandum on the 100 was also to serve before that meeting, except
Correct.
Mr. Gianni would, as you say, subsequently understood, talk to it. You then get a message per page 96 from Mr. Siyabonga Gama instructing you to leave the meeting and informing you that Tammy will speak to the 1064, which is the transaction you are going to speak to.
Correct.
You said that your attendance was on the basis that you were on standby. Is that right?
Yes.
Does that mean that you were going to participate at the meeting if somebody else did not pitch up, or what?
It was a confusing morning. I didn't know whether I should have been there or should not have been there. I was not able to ascertain who was going or who was not going to the
Yes.
meeting. I knew that both of these items were on the agenda, the
Yes.
1064, and for this 160, please also, it also refers to the 100 because the 160, 100 are synonymous for a moment. So I said, if somebody, let me go and be on standby, even if I'm out the door, in case somebody calls.
Or when you say you were on standby, you don't mean that somebody had asked you to go there on the basis of being on standby.
No,
It was
no.
your own decision.
It was my
to
own
say,
decision to-
just in case.
Just in case.
I'm needed.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And for future reference, so that we don't get confused, that SMS you read out states that the 160 has been withdrawn. Would I be correct in saying that the 160 relates to Annexure A, which was the business case for 100 electric locomotives plus 60 diesel locomotives,
That is correct.
bringing the total to 160, and that is in the subject line of Annexure A itself? You received this email, and presumably you then left the meeting,
Yes.
and I see there's a,
So maybe the tone of this SMS from Mr. Siyabonga Gama to you maybe must be understood in the context of the fact that he might not have asked you to attend the meeting, and you might have made your own decision to attend and be helpful if necessary. I'm just thinking when you read it, the tone sounds a little strong. It says he doesn't know why you are there.
I confess, I was also surprised, but this happens in an organization. As I said, it was confusing. I did not know who was formally attending the meeting.
Yes, yes.
It happens.
but
Okay,
I
thank you.
think the chair is asking you a slightly different question, which is if you are not presenting any of the two, on what authority were you at the board meeting, at that meeting? Who decided you may attend the meeting, and what was your purpose for attending that? Were you
Nobody's-
authorized?
Nobody said go. Nobody directed me to go to the meeting. Knowing that the matters were to be presented at the board and that somebody needed to talk to them, and I could not ascertain who was going to be there, and I believe I tried to contact all the relevant people beforehand so that somebody could talk to them if need be. I said, I will go and be available.
What was the norm when there was to be a meeting to be attended in terms of who attends,
Normally it would have been Mr. Garma.
or he would He would indicate who is going to attend.
Either he would or he would delegate a representative, yes.
But on this occasion, you had not received any.
No.
But you thought, in case you could be helpful.
Yes.
Okay.
And if I may say, that talks to his point. Tommy, reading Mr. Thomasankwe Giana,
Yes.
is coming to talk about the 1064 locomotives.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see then at 96 on to page 97, there is a series of other SMSs. Are they relevant to this conversation, and can you unpack them? What transpired after you received this message?
Well, after I received the message, I left the meeting. I SMSed Mr. Gama with the second SMS there. I'm out, was called, I thought for the 1064, was here in case you wanted me. They've moved on from 1064. The 100 is coming up very soon, perhaps 10 minutes. Mr. Gama replied, and the timing of these emails, he sent me the first email at
At 9:20.
9:28. I replied at 9:36. I was out the boardroom. At 9:40, Mr. Gama SMS'd, Brian has withdrawn the 160. You can come back to the office. And by that time, at 10:10, I SMS'd Mr. Gama to say, thanks, Tommy is here. Spoke to Mr. Gianni at the meeting and went back to the office.
Now, there are further SMSs at the bottom of page 96 on to 97. Can you complete this communication, SMS communication between yourself and
Sure.
Mr. Gama?
So then Mr. Gama SMS'd me and says, so what did you talk to Badek about? I'm here now, and I really don't like confusion.
And this is addressed to you?
This is addressed to me.
Yes.
And I responded to Mr. Gama and said, morning. Then, what is the, and I responded the following day, on the 22nd. Morning, what is the way forward with 100 plus 60, please? Is there anything we can do, research or rewrite? Are there implications for the board agenda for Wednesday? Thanks, Francis. Because normally these, in order of protocol, it would go through the Board and Acquisitions Development Council, and depending on the level of approval, it would then go to the board. So this had an implication for the board agenda with the value.
And you're suggesting there was an upcoming board meeting
Yes,
on that Wednesday?
yes.
And what was the response there to you?
His response was, and I read the last SMS there, I believe it remains withdrawn. I'm now trying to see how we can get leased locomotives from Queensland. GCE said to me, if I need anything, it must be less than $1 billion if it's capital, and for a confinement, it must be within his authority.
I see that you don't seem to have responded to his question. What did you talk to BATC about?
I do believe that I phoned him on that one. It's not in an SMS.
Okay.
And my recollection
Yeah,
is that I phoned him to say,
yeah,
explaining why I was there,
yeah.
the confusion.
Okay.
Then on the question of the chair, yes, it's not in the SMSs, but just for the record, besides being present at the meeting before you got an instruction to leave the meeting, had you addressed the meeting at all? Had you done anything in that meeting?
No, I
At
had
that
not addressed
point.
the meeting.
Okay. So then you are informed that it remains withdrawn, the 160 proposal, and the thinking is perhaps to lease this from Queensland. I take it Australia.
Lease locomotives, alternative locomotives from Queensland, Australia, yes.
And then what happened after you received that response from Mr. Gama?
Well, the next significant development was that I prepared a updated version of the business case, or a slightly revised version of the business case, which I presented for Mr. Gama, which he signed on the 25th of November 2013. So this was now for a month later.
And what led to your revision of that business case? What was the cause of the revision?
The instructions and directions on what to revise were normally telephonic at the time, so I can't state specifically it was this phone call, or it certainly wasn't an email or this phone call or SMS which said, okay, so that one's been withdrawn, please prepare another one, get it going again, that we can submit it again the next time and try our luck again, is how I interpreted it.
Okay.
That was my interpretation of prepare it again, ready for resubmission in a month's time, maybe we have better luck. That was my interpretation of it
Okay.
at the time.
You have attached this submitted, or this revised version as Annexure 3,
Correct.
and that starts at your page 99. Is there any difference between Annexure 1, which is the 15th of October 2013 submission, and this revised version? Is there any difference between the two documents? That is key that you'd like to bring to the chair's attention? Or is it the same document now redated?
In essence, the documents are the same. They are both for 100 class 19E equivalent dual voltage electric locomotives and for 60 class 43 diesel locomotives per the heading. That there were minor corrections, yes, because at the bottom left-hand corner, the first one on page 70, it's revised version 11A,
Yes.
and the version of page 99 is version 12. So I did some minor changes. I can't say
if
exactly
they are
what
not
they were.
material,
Yes.
you don't need
Not
to
material.
bother to, you don't need to bother to list them.
And now, this one is dated the 25th of November, 2013.
Yes, it was signed by Mr. Garmer on the 25th of November.
And that is at page 123. I
That
see
is
this
correct.
document we have, unlike the first version, was signed only by Mr. Gama and not by the rest of the people whose names appear there, who were intended to sign it. Do you know whether they in fact did sign this version eventually?
It's my understanding that it was not signed further. I have no record of it being signed further.
So, do you know then what happened to this version that you submitted as an extra 3 on, as signed by Mr. Gama on 25th November
Not definitively.
2013?
No. I know it went to group, but I believe it went to group, but I cannot say where it got stopped in the process or where it stopped in the process.
What do you mean group? Whose group?
Group as in Transnet Group head office, which would forward prepare documents for BADIC and for board.
Do you know whether the persons for whom provision had been made for them to sign on that memorandum, do you know whether the absence of their signatures may have been because they didn't agree, or whether the memorandum wasn't given to them or anything, or you just don't know
I don't
what
know.
happened? You don't
I
know?
don't know.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So this is now the 25th of November 2013. Insofar as this proposal is concerned, do you hear anything from anyone thereafter, after that date?
No, it was quiet, and one proceeded with other work till the next event was really the afternoon of Friday, the 18th of January.
And what happened on that day?
I then received the following SMS from Mr. Garmer, and if I may read it, because I think it sets out what happened. Hi, Francis and JD. Group has asked that we find 50 million additional revenue for next year.
And that's one of the corrections? It says 500 here, 500 million.
Sorry,
but
500
you say
million.
50.
500 million.
Okay,
It's 500,
500
yes.
million.
Sorry,
Okay.
500 million. They also want us to add 1,000 wagons for CAPEC for TE, that's Transnet Engineering. I've suggested that we need 80, not 60 Class 43 diesels. They're asking that we table a business case for 80, but it needs to be signed off by 10 o'clock on Monday in order for it to be on Baddick Pack for next Friday's meeting, 24 January. What miracle can you work for me? Sia. Well,
That seemed much more friendlier than the SMS.
may I say, no, there was no offense given and none taken at the time. These things happen.
Yeah.
So the request there is to take the same proposal, except instead of the 60 diesel, you must make provision for 80 diesel.
Correct.
And this you must have completed by the following Monday, having received the message on
Friday.
Friday.
Yes,
In preparation for a BEDEC meeting the following Friday.
correct.
Did you respond to this SMS?
Well, before I responded personally, my first thing was I contacted a colleague, that was Pragasan Pillay, who was General Manager Logistics Integration of this SMS.
May I interject? Pragasan Pillay is Praggessan, surname Pillay,
Yes,
for record purposes. Thank you.
thank you. He and I were extremely close colleagues, and all our locomotive interactions, because he was in charge of the operational aspects of locomotives, we were working very closely, particularly when it came to designing how locomotives and allocating how locomotives would be used, and operational capabilities and operational deployment. So the business case had to tie in with what he wanted. So I told him about this SMS, and as I said, he's responsible for all the operational aspects of the locomotive fleet, and we had this particularly close working collaboration. JD sent the SMS to Gama and copied me. Boss, I had a chat with Francis. We will be meeting tomorrow to get the case out. We do have tons. We will be tracking above the budget for next year. They're covered by resources, but not reliable as we like them to be. There is operational detail here of also Polokwane needs the 34-200s to be replaced. That's a diesel locomotive. We're plan to hold them together with Copex. I'm not sure that I need to read the message,
No.
but effectively, we were in contact. I believe we met on the Saturday to put this together. And the upshot of this was that on Monday, the 24th of January, I emailed Mr. Gama a revised business case for 100 locomotives and 80 diesels, that was a revised version 14 dated 20th of January. And I sent a Word version to Mr. Gama's PA, Mr. Singh's PA, and on Tuesday I sent a Word version to Mr. Gianni, the supply chain officer. So it was distributed fairly widely.
And you were able to work the miracle that Mr. Gama was hoping you'd be able to by Monday.
Yeah, we got a business case out.
Now, we are now at sequentially version 3, which you have annexed as an extra 5 and 5A. If we could go to version 2, an extra 5A, and that's at page 129. The first difference with this, if compared to our very first being an extra 1, is the subject title. So whereas an extra 1 was making provision for 100 electric locomotives and 60 diesel, this one adjusted the diesel requirement up to 80.
Correct.
May we accept that the body of the document and the calculations recognizes that change, and that change is given effect to in the numbers?
Correct.
Besides that change, did anything else change in FA1 as compared to an extra 1, your very first business case?
The logic of the business case, the layout of the business case, and the essential arguments remained all the same.
Yes.
it is my recollection that, of course, I adjusted various figures and various tonnages related to the change in locomotives, but it was an update of previous work. Fortunately, it wasn't a rewrite completely from scratch.
And Annexure 5A still argues for confinement to Mitsui at this stage.
And 5A still argues for confinement to Mitsui on the same basis as we had before.
As we have had along. You indicate you distributed this to the people you mentioned in your paragraph 38. And then what happened thereafter?
Not in the case. There was various emails between myself, Mr. Singh, and Mr. Peter, where I had emailed previous versions of business cases and corrected some of the financial calculations. We found an error in the work I'd done over the weekend, and that was corrected. But the key point was that on the morning of Wednesday, the 22nd of January, I received an email from Ms. Lindiwe Mtleche, also from Supply Chain Services.
May I spell that for the record? It's first name Lindiwe, surname Mdletsze.
Yes.
Thank you.
And she requested my assistance on the formatting my memorandum of the previous Monday, the one which I had distributed widely on Monday. When I looked at the memorandum she sent me, I noticed that the memorandum had been changed significantly to give effect to confine an award to CSR for 100 electric locomotives. And the confinement I had to Mitsui was totally removed.
And you attach these documents as Annexure 7. Could we then go to Annexure 7 and Annexure 7A so that you can work us through these details?
Certainly.
So you're saying you prepared a memorandum which made out a case for the confinement to Mitsui.
Correct.
And you were now discovering that it had been changed significantly, and the memorandum was now making out a case for confinement to CSR.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Your Annexure 7 starts at page 158, and then it's thereafter followed by 7A. At 158, is that the email you referred to from Ms. Mtleche?
That is the email I received from Ms. Mtleche. May I point out that while the email reads, please see slide evaluation methodology that needs to be incorporated into the Word documents. If I could take you through, please, to the attachments. There are 2 attachments which she sent me. And this was the document I was put it into. BADIC 180 revised version 15, 120 GP Doc X. That is the memorandum attached as Annexure 7A, and then there was the slide that I was to add into the document.
So you received 2 documents from Ms. Mtleche. The slide, on the one hand, is a one attachment, and you received the document that you have marked 7A, which is a revised version of what you had provided, the memo you had provided to Mr. Singh, Mr. Gama, and Mr. Peter.
Yes.
2 days previously.
Yes.
Okay. You then receive this document, and what do you do with it?
I put the slide in.
Yes.
I formatted it.
Or maybe, before dealing with what you did with it, in terms of the significant changes that you say were there, maybe if you can identify those first.
If I may suggest, Chair, actually Mr. Callard has done that. They are fairly significant.
Yeah.
That is Annexure 8, which is upcoming, where
Yeah.
he's going to take us to the changes made to his original document. So
Yes.
basically what he does, he takes his original document and he shows where there have been deletions and changes. And he
Yes.
makes a direct comparison.
Yes.
That exercise, I believe, is better appreciated through Annexure 8,
Yes,
which is the next slide that we are going to deal with.
but shouldn't we have that before we hear what he did with the document?
May I say, the essence, I did exactly what Ms.
Yes.
McLetchie asked me.
Yes.
I took the document, put it in the slide.
Yes.
So took the slide, put it in the document, formatted it correctly, sent
Yes.
it back to her.
Oh, okay.
And then,
Okay, no, I thought the question was meant to where it went as
No, no, no,
opposed
no,
to what
no.
you did. Okay, I may have misunderstood
Thank
the
you, Chair.
question.
The sum effect
Okay.
is that the request had been,
Yes.
please add this slide
Yeah.
to the body of the document.
Yes.
And as I
And he
understand,
just
Mr.
did
Callard,
it.
that's exactly what he did.
Okay, no,
It's in the
that's
course
fine.
of doing so,
Yes.
if I understand you correctly, that you realize that this is not the same document that
Yes.
I had sent out to inter alia Ms.
Okay.
Mdletshe herself.
No, no, that's fine. So let's go ahead then.
Then, which then leads us to your paragraph 40, and you talk about a comparison between, I'll call it your version and the version received for Ms. Mdletshe, and you have
Yeah.
attached this as Annexure 8.
correct.
And Annexure 8, Chair, will start at your page 186.
Thank you.
You list a number of changes under paragraph 40, going on to paragraph 41. Let's take them a step at a time, and if you can refer the chair to the specific places where these changes occur, or the key ones at least.
Well, the key changes were 40.1, references to 19E equivalent had been removed throughout the document. If one were to turn to page 187,
Yes?
first example of that is item 1B, to approve the investment in and procurement of 100, and where we had class 19E equivalent electric locomotives, the class 19E equivalent has been removed. That is, I believe, consistent throughout the document.
So the effect of that amendment is to render 1B whereas 1B sought an approval for the procurement of 100 class 19E electric locomotives. The change results in the approval sought being for the procurement of 100 locomotives simply.
Correct.
Okay.
May I add that the consequence of that, or the implications of that, is that the characteristics of the locomotive, the desired characteristics of the locomotive of the 19E, of its 26 tons per axle, and the power equivalency of a 19E locomotive had been taken out of the business case.
And you state that throughout the document, reference to class 19E equivalent is taken out.
I can't recall a place where it is left in the document.
Yes, you can, what is then the next significant change?
40.2, the motivation to confine to Mars had been removed and replaced with confinement to CSR. That appears on page 200.
Would it perhaps, Mr. Callard, if we start at page 188, which is the first place where this change occurs. 188,
My apologies.
paragraph 5.
180. Yes, 188. First
Yes.
place it occurs, yes. 188, paragraph 5, and here it reads, now reads, the submission proposes an accelerated procurement to mitigate general freight MDS volumes at risk by confining 100 electric locomotives to CSR, China South Rail, e-locomotive supply, and the balance. That now changes the confinement, We can see the changes in the track changes in the document. This is now, confinement to Mars is now consistent through the document. The motivation for confinement to Mitsui has been removed and been replaced by a confined motivation to confine to China South Rail.
Before we deal with the next change, I would like to take you back to 187, which is something you don't highlight in your statement, and in particular, under purpose, paragraph 1F, F for Freddie.
Yes.
The original document appeared to have proposed that once the contracts are negotiated, to inform the board of the final price cost, and the then 1G suggested that the GCE be delegated the power to sign. Insofar as F is concerned, that requirement to inform the board of the final price appears to have been taken out.
Correct, that has been taken out, and it is my interpretation that the addition under what is now, was G, now F, the power be delegated to the GCE award, including process and approval, takes us even further.
So then
Conferring
if-
powers.
What's your understanding of including process approval? Does that mean that what was intended with this amendment was that the GCE would be the one to decide on what process should be followed to get approval?
Because I did not add those words, I did not want
You
to
don't know.
impute to the
Yes.
author what he
Yes.
exactly meant.
Yes.
What I was giving there was my interpretation of the words for process approval was that it extended, process approval could be argued to go right up to award
Yes.
the
Yes.
business.
Yes.
It is an interpretation of those words.
Yeah. Okay. No, I just wanted your own interpretation.
But
as
I cannot
somebody who was
impute what the
Yes.
author meant, but that is my
Okay.
interpretation of the words.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. It has been brought to my attention that it's time for your teaching.
We'll take the tea adjournment and we'll resume at 11:30.
Thank you.
We adjourn. Okay, let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Callard, we are still at your page 9 of your statement. We have dealt with 40.1, 40.2, and the changes that were effected at page 187 relating to the requirement for approval by the board. We now move on to your 40.3, and we deal with the change effected there. When you're ready.
Under 40.3, what had also been removed was the benefit of the standardizations of the locomotives. And for that, if we could please refer to page 200
Yes?
and 201.
Okay. Starting at 200,
Correction, let's go to 201, please,
okay?
on standardization. 201, paragraph D, where what has been taken out was that the standardization has two elements: operational standardization and maintenance standardization. We will see that whole section has been deleted, and it has been replaced with wording to the effect that CSR has been adjudicated as being the best bidder during the 95 electric locomotive process. Recall now that the 95 electric locos, which were then classed 20E, were general freight locomotives. Both these tenders now include board-approved methodology. Transnet has spent a huge, large amount of time, human capital, money in the recent tenders. Production of the Mars, and I'm reading from Romans numerals 2, production of the current Mars contract has been completed and was based on previous procurement methodology where supplier development was not a key focus area, and the Mitsui Consortium did not fare well in the two most recent tenders issued by Transnet. That would be the 1064 including. Therefore, a continuation with Mitsui via confinement would pose unnecessary risk to the organization. Effectively, none of this addresses the key point that was made out of standardization and interoperability, and that has been replaced with, may I put it, extraneous material.
Well, once whoever it is who made the decision to say it should no longer, the memo should no longer be talking about Mars, but CSR, once they had made that change, would it be true that the standardization that giving the contract to Mars would, the benefits that Transnet would gain in terms of standardization would no longer apply once it was CSR?
Correct. The benefit of standardization would be negated.
Would be negated,
Yes.
yeah. So that part had to go, but of course, you still have the question of the motivation why the change from Mars to CSR.
Correct.
Yeah, because then they would need to address the question of what about the benefits that Transnet would have gained by giving the contract to Mars, which is what your original memorandum was about.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And perhaps just to complete on that point, if you go a page back at 200, this would have started at the bottom of page 199. It is a quotation from the procurement policy regarding requirements to be met for confinement to be invoked. And at 200 under C, it states that for reasons of standardization or compatibility with existing goods and services, a case must be made that deviation from existing standardized goods or services will cause major operational disruption. If not, confinements based on standardization will not be considered. You see that part?
Yes.
Now, my question to you
Well,
is...
I don't see it. I'm trying
Oh,
to find
I
it
apologize,
on
Chair.
page 200.
At page 200 at the top in bold,
Oh, where it says for reasons, okay.
where it says for reasons under C.
Yes, yes.
That
okay.
is a continuation from 199
Yes.
the requirements for confinement.
Confinement, yeah.
And now, the aspect that Mr. Callard has just dealt with. Is it your evidence that in seeking to confine the acquisition to Mars, you argued that coal line or the coal division was already owning and operating 19E locomotives, and that these would be compatible, what you're acquiring would be compatible with what you already have?
That is correct. The fleet of locomotives on the coal line comprised 7E locomotives and series, 11E locomotives, AC only, and those were quite old, and the bulk of the coal line fleet, the major element, was the recently acquired 110 19E locomotives. The confinement to Mars for the additional 100 locomotives fully met the requirements of C, where for reasons of standardization and compatibility with existing goods or services, that box was firmly ticked. We made the case why we did not want to deviate from that because of both spares holding and a maintenance holding, and we also mentioned driver training plus other factors in that.
At that time, did the coal division have within its fleet any locomotive manufactured by CSR?
No, at the time that this memorandum was changed, this is now in January 2014, Transnet Freight Rail had not taken delivery of a single locomotive from CSR. The contract for the 95 locomotives had previously been awarded to CSR. A locomotive had been delivered into the country, manufactured from China. If my memory serves me correctly, this was around about November 2013. I give or take the exact date. There was a ceremony around that. And that locomotive was currently undergoing prototype and performance testing on the freight rail network. It had not been taken into service. We had no, effectively, goods or services, and I'm quoting here from point D, we had no goods or services reading locomotives previously executed by the supplier in service at the time this memorandum was changed.
So going back to the question I asked when you were dealing with the removal or deletion of the standardization part of your memorandum and its replacement by what we have looked at in terms of CSR. So standardization, apart from whatever benefit Transnet would get by giving the contract to Mars, but apart from that, standardization would have been or was one of the grounds that would justify confinement. Is that right?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
If I may use perhaps an automotive example, and may I mention trade names just for sake of the argument. I own a delivery service and I have 100 Toyota trucks, 1-ton trucks. I have a maintenance facility set up for those 1-ton trucks. I keep a stock of spares for those 1-ton trucks. I wish now to increase my fleet. I go out on tender. If I were to increase my fleet to, say, now changing from Toyota to Ford, for example, what the driver training in an automotive truck is not the big issue, but I now have a different workshop facility that I have to set up. I have a different spares holding that I have to set up. And this complexity is amplified when one deals with locomotives because of the nature of their spares and the long-term capital items, those spares, how long they are held for, and the price of those spares. So it means that, as an example, I now have to hold spares for Toyota, I have to hold spares for Ford, but if I just increased my fleet in Toyota, for example, I don't have to double up on my spares holding because though doubling my fleet, I only need to increase my spares by perhaps 25%, whereas I would have to do it completely differently if I changed the brand which I was doing automotive. Exactly the same type of argument and savings hold true in locomotive spares.
Thank you, Chair. Then, if we are to understand you, based on what you have previously said, you already had 110 19E locomotives,
Correct.
and if the proposal was upheld, you would acquire a 19E type equivalent, and when you confine that acquisition to Mars, you'd actually acquire a 19E because that is a Mitsui locomotive.
Correct. Correct.
And would we be correct to say that the new 100 to be acquired would be replacing the 7E and the 11E that were currently part of the fleet?
It would certainly be replacing the 7E, and it wouldn't be replacing the 11E immediately, but the business case was also to increase the tonnages conveyed over the coal line. So to convey those increased tonnages, we needed additional locomotives.
And then with the replacement of 7E and the 110 already at hand, if the proposal had been upheld to confine to Mars, the division would have ended up with predominantly 19E locomotives to run the coal line.
Correct. Correct.
Now, you pointed us to page 201 under standardization.
Yes.
And reference is made there to the award of 95 electric locos to CSR.
Correct.
And you pointed out that none of these had been delivered. There was only a prototype that was in testing phase at the time.
Correct.
Would we be correct to assume, therefore, that there was nothing in hand with the coal division to standardize with anything that CSR would supply in terms of this proposal?
If I may just say, we use the term coal line. It's not a separate division on its own right.
Okay.
It's a network separation. But there was nothing for the coal line that would be compatible or previously delivered from CSR. So, in fact, we had no CSR locomotive either in general freight at that time or on the coal line.
Now, if I take you a page back to 200, at what was item or paragraph 68, your original memo listed 4 factors there in seeking to address the question of urgency.
Yes.
I see that all those have been listed, have been cancelled out.
Correct. They have been.
As the chair to understand that whereas you were arguing if we acquire the Mars locomotives, the Transnet wouldn't have difficulties with going through the teething phase, first and foremost, because they are already running a 19A.
Specifically, because the new locomotive or the additional 100 would be of the 19E type, maybe with a minor updated variation. They've been through they've been through the teething phase and all the bugs have been ironed out. All the production bugs have been ironed out. Secondly,
continue? Yes.
Secondly, the production line is available and it could be started immediately. We have no crew which need to be trained or passed out on locomotives. And by drawing an analogy similar to an airline, train drivers are passed out for a particular class of locomotive. They cannot arbitrarily change from one class to the other. It's not like I climb into a car brand A tomorrow and I can drive car brand B the next day. They have to pass through a particular pass-out procedure, retraining for the characteristics of that locomotive, which addressed the driver one. And perhaps summarizing the production, D effectively summarizes points B, A, and B above, that confinement would be the quickest delivery with the existing facilities already available and previously used for assembly of the 110 that we had on the coal line.
Now, I see then at 68 that what you previously had in that paragraph to address the question of urgency has been deleted in its entirety.
In its entirety, yes,
And it does not, there doesn't appear to have been a substitution there.
indeed. What has been put in its place or left is the following paragraph, which is now 68, was complementing the urgency. We had a paragraph specifically addressing the urgency as to why it was urgent,
Yes?
and then paragraph 68 was complementing the above. It was adding the complementary information. It was not the prime de facto reasons for the urgency. They have now, this change has turned the complementary reasons into the prime reasons.
So then, the actual document doesn't address urgency, it just kicks off with a phrase complementing the urgency that has not been dealt with.
Correct.
That's the effect of it.
I'm trying to make sense of that. Are you able to make sense of that? How do you complement urgency when you haven't addressed urgency?
I'm afraid I can't ask you, Mr. Chairman, because in our original document, we addressed the urgency, and then we added factors complementing the urgency.
Yeah.
Whoever changed the document, talk to that later, the authors of the changed document would have to answer to why they took out the factors of urgency and put in only complementing urgency. I can offer that if one left addressing the urgency in the original points of urgency, CSR would not have complied with addressing the urgency because they have not been through a teething phase. We do not have any on the coal line. There is no production line in South Africa at the moment for those CSR 95 locomotives. We have only had one in from China. Production lines still have to be started up. Crew and drivers and assistants still have to be trained for the 95 locomotives. And confinement will realize the quickest delivery, as will be shown later, because the 95 has to be, the whole production line has to be set up with that. Confinement to 95 negates the whole teething, prototype testing, driver training. It negates all of those reasons which we had, which addressed, which were addressing the urgency.
Thank you, Chair. Then while we are on that section now that survived, dealing with complementing the urgency, I would like us to have particular regard to paragraph B, which reads, as the original read, the tail end of that statement has got an addition. The original read, the locomotives would be largely identical with those already supplied. I'll stop there for now. And that statement is retained in the reworked version of this document. Would that be a correct statement insofar as the CSR?
I'm sorry, did you jump between different documents?
No, Chair, I'm at page 200.
That's where I am too.
If that statement is retained in a proposal arguing for confinement to CSR, That would be incorrect because CSR has not provided any locomotive.
That statement would be false.
It would be false.
Would be false.
Thank you.
It would be false in two ways.
Patently false, eh?
Patently false because they have not supplied a locomotive in production. We have a prototype, it is not in production. Equally to that, if we read the phrase as it has been expanded in the modification, the locomotives will be largely identical to those already supplied and to be supplied. To be supplied, that phrase is in direct contradiction with point D at the top of page 200.
And
With
that point D or the page of 200 is the fourth requirement for confinement.
Right. And if I may read, where the goods or services being procured are highly specialized and largely identical to those previously executed by that supplier. So the phrase "and to be supplied" cannot be compatible with those previously executed by the supplier.
And whoever was making the changes could not have negligently left this part in. Because does it not seem that he or she would have read this part, the locomotives would be largely identical with those already supplied. The moment they read that, they would know that factually, as far as CSR is concerned, there were no locomotives that had previously been supplied.
I have two possible interpretations.
Or maybe if it was negligence, maybe they had a different understanding of this part of the document.
It was either extreme negligence, in which case they should not be addressing the document, or deliberate misrepresentation. I have no other conclusion in my mind.
Because the whole process did address the issue, your memorandum addressed the issue of, are we dealing with an entity that has previously supplied us these locomotives?
Correct.
Now, in terms of your memorandum, when you said that was the case, that was so because that was factually the case.
Correct.
Mars had supplied locomotives.
Mars had supplied locomotives.
Yeah.
Very recently.
Yeah, and now if somebody was going to say, well, let's talk about CSR, and they see a statement that says the locomotives would be largely identical with those already supplied, they've got to ask themselves, has CSR previously supplied locomotives? That is in case they think they might not be sure, but if they know for sure that CSR has never supplied any locomotives, leaving that part of the statement there is quite serious.
Indeed so.
Yeah. Okay.
I would
Please.
I would show later that the phrase largely identical as it relates to CSR does also not hold, because the locomotives that were perhaps contemplated, the locomotives that had been that were on order from CSR, not yet supplied, the 95 locomotives, that class, were not identical, were not largely identical to those that were finally supplied. The phrase largely identical does not hold true either.
And could it be that somebody could say, well, paragraph B didn't say those already supplied needed to be those already supplied by CSR. If they were going to be largely identical to those that Transnet already had, even if they were supplied by somebody else, the statement would be okay? Would that kind of argument apply?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, could you just, I didn't
Yes,
quite...
let me repeat. You see, paragraph B that we are talking about
Yes.
says to the reader of this memorandum, when you read it together with the changes that have been effected to your memorandum, says that CSR will be supplying, that the locomotives that CSR would be supplying would be largely identical with those already supplied. Now, based on your memorandum, when you wrote this in the context that the locomotives already supplied were locomotives already supplied by the entity that was sought to be given the contract.
Correct.
Okay.
Matsui, yes.
Yes, but I'm now saying, is it possible, is it a plausible interpretation of that paragraph for somebody to say already supplied, locomotives already supplied, didn't have to be locomotives already supplied by CSR, as long as Transnet had locomotives that it already had, even if they were supplied by somebody else, and now CSR was somebody else. If the CSR would supply locomotives that were largely identical to locomotives that Transnet already had, that would mean that this paragraph is not false. In other words, the locomotives that were contemplated CSR would supply, were they going to be largely identical to those that MAS had supplied before?
Right. The locomotives that were contemplated, I say, let me use the phrase,
contemplated.
potentially contemplated,
Yes.
to be supplied by CSR, were not largely identical to those already supplied by MAS. We categorize locomotives by locomotive types. So you've heard us specifically talk of a 19E locomotive.
Yes, yes.
A 19E is a different locomotive to a 20E locomotive. And that would generally be, it has a different weight, it has a different power, it might be has a different traction, it has different components, and also from a different supplier, because the spares and the operations of the locomotive are subtly different. So the 95 locomotives that we were getting from CSR were known in the organization as type 20E. Even though we hadn't got one, or we had only had a prototype, it was classified already as a type 20E. A type 20E locomotive is not largely identical to the 19E.
Yes.
So the contemplated delivery of the 20E locomotives, the 95 20E locomotives by CSR, cannot be considered largely identical to the 19E that we already had from MAS, even though it was contemplated delivery in the future. Cannot be considered identical.
Then if I can just perhaps follow up on the chair's
Maybe I missed
questioning.
something, sorry.
Again, we're still at page 200 and we're looking at the various requirements.
Yes.
Requirement D at page 200 at the top of the page states as follows: when the goods or services being procured are highly specialized and largely identical to those previously executed by that supplier.
Yes.
Now, I'll stop there. Now, CSR in this contest would not be that supplier because it had not previously supplied to Transnet.
Indeed, and a critical point, CSR is that supplier and it had not delivered anything.
Yes, so there was nothing to compare and
Nothing
therefore
to
to
compare
determine
to.
whether it is identical. And
Correct.
as the chair, as you point out, the addition to that statement is identical with those to be supplied. You see that?
Yes.
Now, the requirement that they be identical to those supplied would be outside the scope of D. D requires that they be supplied B in hand in order to be compared and to determine whether they are identical. Would I be correct in saying so?
Sorry, could you just
I'm
restate
looking
again,
at
please?
B, and we agreed that B is in two parts.
Yes,
It says the locomotives would largely be identical with those already supplied, and we have answered the questions that they have not been supplied.
They
And there's
haven't
an addition there, there that says, and to be supplied. Now, I'm addressing myself to the to be supplied. Now, the proposition I'm making is, even if they were identical to those to be supplied, that would be beyond the requirement of D, of requirement D of confinement, because D says that they must have been previously supplied, not to be supplied in the future.
that is correct, and it was the point I was making, if I may restate it.
Yes.
CSR had not supplied any locomotives. We had on order locomotives from CSR. They have not been supplied. So they are in the to be supplied arena. They are to be supplied. They cannot therefore comply with the requirement previously executed by that supply. And that's the point. They are
Well-
to be supplied and they've not been executed.
Well, doesn't that part that say and to be supplied compound the problem?
Indeed, it did, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Because the paragraph says the locomotives would be largely identical with those already supplied. That's what it says. Now, there, you're talking about the first reference to locomotives has to be a reference to the locomotives to be supplied. The first reference, that the ones to be supplied would be largely identical to those that have already been supplied.
Already been supplied.
Yes. Now, that makes sense, okay? Now, if you then add and to be supplied, it seems to me that what the sentence then says is the locomotives would be largely, the locomotives to be supplied by CSR
Yes.
would be largely identical with those to be supplied, with those that have been supplied and with those to be supplied. Or am I missing something?
I'm sorry, because CSR had not supplied any locomotives yet, there was nothing to compare them to.
No, leave that part. We have dealt with that part. That part. Focus on the to be supplied.
I'm
part.
focusing on, yes,
Those to be supplied, as I understand it, is locomotives, refers to locomotives to be supplied by CSR on this amended
on this
version.
one, yes.
On this amended version. Okay, let's start again, just
Yes,
so that we
okay.
are on the same page. I'm saying, if you leave out the added part, which says and to be supplied, if you leave that part out, the sentence makes sense. It says, in effect, the locomotives that are to be supplied by the supplier that the memo is talking about will largely be identical with those already supplied. And we know from D at the top that Ms. Silo has referred to that means those previously supplied by the same supplier, okay? That's fine. But now they add that the locomotives to be supplied will largely be identical with those, and now I skip your part, with those to be supplied. The locomotives to be supplied by CSR will largely be identical with those to be supplied by CSR. That seems to me to be what it says.
I'm struggling with that, with almost the, if I may say, the self-referential part of that, because if CSR is supplying locos
Yeah.
on the 95 contract, the locomotives that would be supplied under, if this confinement were to go to CSR, could not be largely identical to those of the 95. They could not be largely identical. As I said, because the 95 locomotives were for general freight. They were 22-ton axle locomotives. They were of a lesser power. If CSR were to supply these locomotives, as we know they eventually did, they would have to be heavier and more powerful, so they could not be largely identical.
But the essence of paragraph B, as you had it
Yes.
in your memo before they were supplied, I mean, that paragraph B is linked to paragraph D at the top of page 200.
Correct, yes, yes.
Because it's one of the grounds on which you can justify confinement.
Correct.
You know,
Yes.
that we are dealing here with a supplier who has previously supplied us
Yes.
with these kinds of goods. So it's justified to confine this and not to go to open tender.
Yeah.
So now, but here now, it would then say, in regard to what they have added, the locomotives to be supplied by CSR will largely be identical to those to be supplied by CSR.
That was my self-referential problem.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
Yes, Chair, we agree. Clearly,
Maybe there is something that we all don't understand, that somebody else not in this room
perhaps that might
understands.
shed light. But the effect of what the Chair is pointing out is we propose that we supply to CSR because, no, we propose that we confine to CSR because the locomotives to be supplied by CSR are identical to those locomotives to still be supplied by CSR. That's the sum effect of it.
And as I said, they cannot be identical because the locomotives on order to be supplied, on order, cannot be identical to the locomotives intended under this confinement. They are not the same locomotives.
Because the ones that are on order are 20E and we are looking for 19E, which is a heavier.
And we're looking for a heavier locomotive, yes. So what's on order cannot be identical to what's intended in this confinement.
You see, to compare, you need at least two things.
Correct.
You can't compare if you have got one thing. The locomotives to be supplied are the same locomotives that they are comparing them with, Yeah, okay, let's move on.
Maybe the author of the changes will shed some light, Chair. Yes. Then if we move on, we move to page 201 of the same document. Under standardization, you dealt with item Roman 1 at 201, which is where reference to 95 electric locos is made.
Yes.
Now, under D there at page 201, there are three factors that are advanced to justify a confinement to CSR. We've dealt with the first, and we cannot make sense of it. But there's a second and a third. I'm particularly interested in the second. Can you express a view on that factor if you are able to?
May I just pick up where you are? Are we under D?
D, Roman 2, new 2.
D, new Roman 2.
Yes.
Is this the one? Production of the current
Yes.
Mars contract has been completed and was based on a previous procurement methodology where supply development was not a key focus, and the Mitsui consortium did not fare well in the two most recent tenders issued by Transnet. Therefore, continuation of Mitsui via confinement would pose unnecessary risks to the organization. It is my interpretation that this refers to the two tenders, the one on which it is my understanding that Mitsui, which was for the 95 locomotives, which was an open tender process for which both Mitsui and Mars tendered, which was awarded, amongst others, which was awarded to CSR. And then the second tender would have been the tender for the 599 electrics as part of the 1064, where they are saying, the author here states that Mitsui did not fare well in those two most recent tenders.
Please.
If I may add, that would be rather unusual to put this in here, because this memorandum is dated, or it was ultimately dated, various dates for it went to the Board and Acquisitions Development Council on the 24th of January, and at that point only was the shortlisting and the methodology would have been of the confinement would have been approved by the board. So whoever was writing this document was doing so with prior knowledge of what was going to go to the board.
Now, you are very familiar with these documents. I just want to test my understanding as regards the issue raised in Roman 2. The effect, my interpretation of that is that it stated that Mitsui did not fare well in 2 most recent tenders issued by Transnet, and that is the basis on which we cannot confine to Mitsui. So we are punishing Mitsui for having failed in 2 previous tenders. Would I be correct?
I think that is a fair reading of this paragraph.
And because they had failed, did not fare well in previous 2 tenders, that posed a risk to Transnet.
And that is how the author has written this paragraph.
Based on your experience at Transnet and knowledge, what risk could that potentially pose for Transnet? Can you think of any that perhaps?
I do not wish to go to the realm of speculation,
Yes.
but I believe a totally separate area of discussion and debate would be how this statement came into being and the genesis of this statement in the evaluation of the 1064. I do not wish to say any further about it at the moment. I think it needs to be
Yes,
tested.
but council is asking a different question, and for you to be able to comment if you are able to. As I understand the question, she would like you to say what you think of that argument they put forward, saying Mars had performed poorly in 2 previous, I think it's tenders or whatever.
Tenders, check.
Whether you have any comments as to the soundness of that argument.
Yes, Chair.
May I address it in 2 forms? Technically, the locomotives would have been fine. We have gone through various iterations of the business case signed off by various people as we went through from October through to November, and the organization, and certainly Freight Rail, was happy with confinement to Mars, so we've addressed the technical issues of the locomotive. So technically, there would have been no risk to the organization. I cannot comment as to what risk the supplier development methodology or lack thereof posed to the organization. That is a procurement issue, and that might have be related to the image and or other standing of the organization, but it was not an operational issue, if I may leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. That then takes us to, if you've got no further comments on your paragraph 40.3, that then takes us to a different issue, which you deal with at paragraph 40.4.
Maybe just so that Mr. Callard, you don't think that you are being prevented from dealing with an issue that you think is important. You just mentioned what you said you thought the debate should be in regard to that. So if you deal with that in your statement at some stage, you can do so. But if you don't, you can deal with it now to say what was the origin of that. So I leave it to you, and Ms. Silo, whether that is dealt with later in the statement or whether it's something you want to deal with
This
now.
particular aspect is not dealt with further in the
Yes,
statement, Chair.
yes.
It's not dealt with further in my
Yes.
statement.
Yes, if you are able to give evidence about the origin, then do so.
This is a personal opinion based on my workings. It is not in my statement because it is outside of my bounds of personal experience, but it relates to documents I have had access to and read. That the evaluation methodology as prescribed as originally prescribed through the Department of Trade and Industries and National Treasury, as reflected into the request for proposals, as later taken through into the evaluation process and the scoring of the locomotives. I am personally uncomfortable. I cannot at the moment give you the chapter and verse of why I'm comfortable, but from everything I have read and seen of this, I am uncomfortable. That's
Okay.
the essence of where I
Okay.
am.
As we go through the statement, we perhaps will have opportunity to deal with some of those issues that make you uncomfortable.
Thank you.
And perhaps, Chair, that it might answer the issue that the Chair raises. You then refer at page 9 of your statement, in particular paragraph 40.4, to page 22 as one of the key changes that you wanted to highlight.
Yes.
And your page 22 really refers type 22, Chair, that would be page 208 of the record.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Please take us through that.
I cannot, my comment there was that if we look at the table at the top of page 208, which talks to the supplier development category, and it has the weighting which would be required for various supplier development categories. My only comment on this is that the weightings have been removed. Now, I'm not the procurement specialist, but in all our tenders, we require that our tenders, they are evaluated in terms of these particular weightings. It was both of interest, well, let me say, it was unusual for me that having changed this confinement, that these weightings would have been removed. I offer the comment only in hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight to this, to where we know supplier development and local content has gone in terms of all our locomotive builds. I make this comment that it is unusual. I leave it at that.
May I inquire then, the table at page 208 regarding the weightings, what is when you put it in the proposal, where had you sourced that from? What is the source of that table? And the allocated weightings?
In preparing these documents, obviously I relied on multiple sources of information, both from my technical colleagues and in the procurement methodology from my colleagues in supply chain service and various others. I would have got the table from them, or they would have inserted the table with me, and we might have discussed this, but I cannot be categoric as to saying this was my exact source, except to say it would have generally come from supply chain services themselves, and often lifted out of existing extant documents.
Although you deal with it in a slightly different order, but because we are already at that page, can you deal then with your issue at paragraph 40.6? I'm skipping 40.5, we'll come back.
Right.
And simply because we are already on the relevant page.
And looking at the revised paragraph 90, subparagraph D, which is Transnet will request a prince range, and that should read price range of between 30.5 million and 32 million for the purpose of negotiation, with the objective of coming in at 34.4 million per locomotive, to which was added the comment, which will be used as a guide as is dependent on forex fluctuation.
Okay, now let's deal with that statement in two parts. Let's deal with the original statement and its meaning, and then we will consider the effect and impact of the addition on the original statement. Now, your suggestion was a price range of between 30.5 to 32 million, coming in post-negotiations at around 34.34 million per locomotive, right? Now, my first question to you is, had your suggested price of 34.34 million incorporated issues relating to forex escalations? Or forex, let me just say, forex at all, had it taken into consideration forex fluctuations at any point?
The 34.4 million, if I may use the phrase, was an over-the-counter price as at the June 2013, when I first did this business case, or one of the versions of this business case. That was the over-the-counter price of the locomotive. That was the over-the-counter price then. The addition of the phrase, which will be used as a guide as is dependent on forex fluctuation, adds a uncertainty and variable to the price which is totally unknown, and enables one to say, well, it begs the question, how much is this locomotive going to cost?
So are we to understand you that if, and I'll use a very loose phrase, Transnet were to go shopping, as at the time you calculated 34.34 million, over the counter, put the cash, they would have received a locomotive at that price?
Yes.
And if the locomotive was to be acquired, the same locomotive, in the future, and particularly over an extended period, being acquired in foreign currency, the 34 would change in time, taking into consideration the forex fluctuations.
The 34 is made up of two components.
Yes.
The local component and the imported component. To acquire the locomotive in the future, the price will change. The local component will be escalated by factors, CPI, Consumer Price Index, and similar type factors. Hope to address that later.
Yep.
The foreign component will be affected by two factors. Primarily the rate of exchange, either the rand-dollar if it is a dollar-based locomotive, rand-yen if it was Japanese, or whatever currency is used for the supply, and the escalation in the foreign country, in the overseas country. Typically, though, that is a very small component. United States escalation was less than 2%, so it had a negligible effect on the price of the locomotive. Major factors being the rate of exchange on the foreign component and South African, and the CPI escalation on the local component.
So would it be a fair conclusion that on the reading of this paragraph, the proposal accepted the price of 34.34? It added that, except that 34.34 would be subject to any forex fluctuations going forward. Would we be interpreting that phrase correctly? So the only factor that would change or affect the 34 million would be the forex fluctuation.
I'm sorry if I'm not answering your question.
Let's
Perhaps
try.
directly. The statement, in fact, is incomplete
Yes.
because be used as a guide dependent on forex fluctuation and it's excluding the local escalation. It does not qualify where it's coming from. It is half an addition. It is not a total component of this price. It just introduces an element of ambiguity around this price, which I cannot quantify to, of what the author was thinking of when he put this price in, when he put this statement onto this price. This price was given as an over-the-counter price, shopping price for a locomotive at that particular point in time. If you want to talk to the price variations, one has to be complete in one's talking to the price escalations and not just a single component. So it introduces an element of ambiguity. But I can't talk
But the point I seek to make is that this was going to the BADC.
Correct.
Are we correct in our interpretation that what's communicated to the BADC is that it's 34.34 million per locomotive, subject only to forex fluctuation?
That is-
on its reading.
On its base reading, that's what's going to the BADC, yes.
Yes, thank
On
you.
its base reading, that's what's going to BADC, yes.
Now that, we have dealt then with your issues raised in 40.1 to 40.6, and over leaflet 10, you have 40.7, paragraph 40.7, and for that you want us to refer to the same annexure at typed page 20, and Chair, that would be page 206 of the record.
Page
206?
6, yeah.
And you wanted to draw the chair's attention to something in particular at 206.
Forgive me if that is the correct reference. Page 20 was changed as follows. Please bear with me a moment while I just pick that one up.
Okay.
Page 20.
Have you given a wrong reference?
It seems,
Could please have regard to page 198?
right, it is,
At 62 at the bottom?
it is page 12, sorry, page 198.
That's 198.
Page 198,
Thank you.
my apologies. That is a wrong reference. If I may talk to that then, my paragraph 40.7,
Yes.
which talks to the heading, extend the current 20E contract for 95 CSR locomotives.
Yes.
I did not pick that up. That should read reference to page 12, which is page 198, the bottom of page 198.
Yes.
Turning to the bottom of page 198, when under the procurement options, I mentioned previously that we identified the need, then we explored the procurement options. This procurement option was exploring extend the current 20E contract for 95 CSR locomotives. I mentioned these are the locomotives in order. I explained there that the current The 20E currently on order is a 22-ton axle per GFL locomotive and is not intended for heavy use on the coal export line. That phrase has been deleted. If we turn over to page 199, we had further written, the first delivery is awaited, the locomotive has still to be tested and is at present unproven. Only after extensive type testing will it be possible to say whether and to what extent it can replicate the heavy haul capabilities of the 19E. That qualification has been removed, importantly, and that without that qualification may lead a reader unfamiliar with locomotives to say, well, thank you, we can just extend to CSR 95. Would lead that understanding to a reader unfamiliar with locomotive characteristics.
And doesn't it go further, Mr. Callard, in a sense that you stated in the original document that the 20E currently on order is a 22-ton per axle locomotive, right?
Yes,
And it is not intended for heavy haul.
correct, bottom of page 198.
At 199, it states the first delivery is awaited, the locomotive has still to be tested and is at present unproven. When you delete the two statements I've read, the effect is to conceal from the reader that the 22-ton per axle locomotive has not yet been delivered and is yet to be tested, and it presently remains unproven. Is that not the case?
That is correct. These statements were in here specifically because they spoke to the procurement confinement conditions, which was to say why we could not confine to CSR. Deleting these statements hides, disguises that fact from the reader, and might lead a reader to presume that confinement to CSR is in order.
Okay. Can we move on then to your paragraph 41 of your statement and following?
On paragraph 41, I talked that the base price of the locomotive was given in Japanese yen. This is because Mitsui Mars was a Japanese-based company, and obviously our rate of exchange was given in, to that locomotive, was given in Japanese yen. With this confinement to CSR, all the financial considerations and discussions in the memorandum were still left in Japanese yen. So it was most unusual to me that you are now changing the locomotive, you're changing the country of supply. From changing the country of supply, one would change the foreign exchange rate, which would be applicable, which was now from yen to dollar. But the memorandum per se was not changed at all, which implies that, I can only say that due thought was not given to the process of the memorandum with a full understanding of its implications.
Now, the memorandum you provided when you were requested to work miracles, you provided on Monday the 21st.
Correct.
The change memorandum comes back to you on Wednesday the 23rd.
21st, 22nd, 23rd, correct.
In between the time you submitted the memorandum as requested and receipt of the change memorandum, were any consultations had with you? Were you engaged in any form regarding these changes?
None whatsoever. Receipt of the revised memorandum on the Wednesday morning was the first time I became aware of these changes. There was no consultation with me or, as far as I could establish, with any of my technical colleagues who were involved in locomotives.
Well,
Was there any discussion?
We may as well find out now who you understood to be the one who made the decision that there must be these changes to your memorandum.
I can't talk, Mr. Chair, to who made the decision, whether it was an individual or a group. There is a trace of emails between myself and various parties, including Gary Peter, that indicate very strongly, suggest, I think, overwhelmingly, that Gary Peter was the author of the revised document. If I may refer you on that score,
Yes.
please, to annexure, sorry, to the previous one, the original revised document, which is, could we go to page 161, please?
We're at 161.
Yes.
Page 161 is the revised document that I received on the morning of Wednesday, the 22nd. If we look at the bottom left-hand corner of that document, the footer of that is BADIC 180 revised version 15. Recall that I sent in version 14, 1020 GP docx. And it is a common practice that we have that if we are revising a document or we identify a document by our initials. I contend from the emails which we had distributed, which included Mr. Gary Peter with his initials here, that he was the author of this document, the revised document. I cannot say that it was his instruction, his idea. I cannot say.
Yes, yes. You can't say whether it was his decision or he was giving effect to somebody else's decision.
I can't
That's
say.
what you're saying, yeah.
I
yeah.
can't say.
But you are saying the letters GP at the bottom of that page refer to Mr. Gary Peter, as far as you are concerned.
Every trail of evidence and logic in the emails of who it's being communicated to and the discussions I'd had with the individuals highlight that it was, point to Gary Peter being the author of this document.
Of the people with whom you were sharing this memoranda, was there anyone other than Mr. Gary Peter who had the initials GP?
No,
He was the only one.
he was the only one.
Yes, okay, thank you.
And if I may then inquire, rehashing a bit what we have dealt with, and you received the reworked version from Ms. Lindiwe Mdletshe as per your annexure FC7, is that correct? That will be at page 158. So much as it bears the initials of Mr. Gary Peter at the bottom to identify the file, the actual document is received by you from Ms. Lindiwe Mdletshe.
Correct, correct.
Now, could you indicate to the chair, if you do know, whether Ms. Mdletshe was a subordinate of Mr. Peter or what their professional relationship was within the organization?
Mr. Gary Peter, as I understand it and recall, was at that time the Group Chief Procurement Officer.
Yes.
Mr. Tamasankwa Gianni was Transnet Freight Rail's Chief Procurement Officer. Transnet Freight Rail as an operating division of Transnet. Each operating division had its own Chief Procurement Officer. I cannot say explicitly the reporting relationships between Mr. Gianni and Mr. Siyabonga Gama as the Group Chief Executive. Obviously, there was a hierarchy because they were in the operational division. However, Group, having a Group Chief Procurement Officer, had certainly policy and oversight, I believe, a role to play in overall procurement. It set standards for procurement. I do not know whether it was a full line or a dotted line relationship. It is my understanding that it was a dotted line relationship between Mr. Gary Peter and Mr. Tamasankwa Gianni, while Mr. Tamasankwa Gianni had a solid line relationship to Mr. Siyabonga Gama as his superior. Ms. Lindiwe Mdletshe was a contracts manager in Mr. Gianni's office, and she was the key go-to person, if I could put it, for the 1064 locomotives, and in fact all the locomotives that we were dealing with, all matters relating to locomotives.
But based on what you state in your paragraph 38 at at 9, as to who you circulated your original version to, Ms. Mdleje was not one of the addressees there.
No, she was not.
Would you know how she came to be in possession of the document?
I can only, it would be a
You can't
reasoned
say.
inference
Yes.
that because I had sent versions of the Word document to Mr. Anosh Singh, who had, and I saw the email trails of that, my original Word document from Mr. Anosh Singh to Mr. Peter. I sent earlier versions from the October versions to Mr. Singh. He also sent them on to Mr. Peter. I sent Word versions of my document to Mr. Tamsanko Giani and to Mr. Siyabonga Gama's office. I cannot say, I have not traced how Ms. Mdleje got this version of the document to send to me.
Okay.
Well, you did say earlier on that there was a practice that your name or initials would appear at the bottom of the document. Now, I don't know whether you said if you were correcting a document or whether just all the documents, maybe the one who compiled, that's the name that the initials that would appear at the bottom, is that right?
It was a practice which was not universally employed, Mr. Chair, but it
Yes.
was often employed. If I got a document
Yes.
and I amended it, I would
Yes.
put my initials at the back of the document that
Yes.
the
Yes.
original author would know this is my version amendment to the
Yes,
document.
yes. And that would be at the bottom of a page in the same way that we see GP at page 161 on this document. Is that in the same way or not?
It would generally be in the file name.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Not all, it wouldn't always appear in the document, it would be in the
Yes.
file name.
Okay.
I had the practice, because I wished to always see traceability of the documents, of putting the document file name in the bottom left-hand corner. That was one of my
Yes.
operating practices.
Yes, yes.
And so comes out here that
Yes.
we can pick up the,
But are you able to say whether Mr. Gary Peter was also in the habit of putting his initials at the bottom of a document that he had put the comments on, or are you not able to say?
I cannot say whether he was in
You
the
cannot
habit
remember.
of.
Yes,
Cannot
yeah.
say.
Okay, but sometimes he did, or you are not sure even of that?
I can't say.
You can't say?
I can't
yeah.
say.
Okay, thank you.
But then the file name would suggest that Mr. Gary Peter effected the amendments, just looking at the file path at the bottom.
Correct.
By inclusion of the initials GP.
Correct.
However, you didn't receive this amended version from Mr. Gary Peter, you received it from Ms. Lindu Mdleje.
Correct.
Thank you. If then we may proceed, again, we are still at paragraph 44, page 10, my apologies. You have now executed the request or the instruction given you by Ms. Mdleje in that you have inserted into the document the proposal, the slide that she requested you to do at page 158.
Just one second. By the way, did Ms. Mdleje say to you in the email whether she had been asked by somebody else to ask you to effect the changes?
No, if we go back to
Page 158?
page 158, which was the email from Ms. Mdleje, she just said, "Hi, Francis. Please see the attached slide evaluation methodology that needs to be incorporated in the Word documents under 84. Please incorporate the changes you did last night."
Okay.
That was,
Thank you.
that was it. No,
Okay.
Thank you.
there was no discussion about the fundamental changes to the document.
So the purpose of sharing the document with you was for you to insert into the document the slide.
Correct.
It was not for you to engage with the changes effected.
No.
You happened to learn that as you worked through the document.
Correct.
One second. Just ask the referent to ask that man at the back door. Thank you.
Thank you,
may
Chair.
proceed.
And you confirm that you did insert the slide, and you say you did you align the document? I think you mentioned something like that.
Perhaps just to give context to how this arose.
Yes.
I use a very structured format of Word to compile a document. If one is unfamiliar with the intricacies of Word documents, of shortcut keys and style headings to achieve a consistent look and feel through the document, it is very difficult for another person to effect those changes neatly in the document. That's why Ms. Mdletshe could not incorporate the document without, may I say, messing up the entire look and feel. So the easiest thing for her to do, and this is a very reasoned inference, Francis, your document, here's a slide, please fix it up. And that's why she sent it to me.
Okay, now, and you effected those changes? And
I
you sent
effected
it
those
back.
changes, yes.
You say at paragraph 38, now let's trace a bit. You were requested to work miracles. You did,
Yeah.
together with your team. And you said 38 that you provided a revised version in PDF format to Mr. Gama.
Yes.
You go further to say you then provided a Word version to Mr. Gama's PA, Mr. Singh's PA, and to Mr. Tamsan Ngajiani.
On Tuesday, yes.
Why did you provide the PDF version in the one hand, and then you provided the Word version to those PAs on the other hand?
It is generally common practice. Having worked on a document like this over the weekend, there were going to be inevitably changes that needed to be made. I could not say categorically that I had effected everything or that the document was perfect in every way. And if somebody needed to correct a spelling, dot an I, cross a T, that's what you need the Word document for. And I circulated the Word document as widely as possible to Mr. Gama and Mr. Singh. That was just standard practice because knew they wanted it. I cannot recall whether it was a request or to send it to Mr. Gianni. I'm sure it was, because otherwise I can't recall why I would have sent it on the Tuesday. I'm sure it was a request to send it to him. But I must admit, I did not think anything about it, because when we are dealing with documents like that in a collaborative format, one shares the Word format. Otherwise, you are forcing every change to come back to you as an individual, and you can be a bottleneck for the changes. And
Yes.
yeah, so
Now-
it's a collaborative effort.
I take it this would not have been your first proposal within the organization?
No, not at all.
In the past, when you finalized a document and you send it out to those who must receive it and they make changes, are these final changes or are they proposed changes? What subsequently happens regarding engagement with you on the suggested changes? Or is it a case of you forward it, changes are made, and that becomes the final document? What's the standard practice?
May I answer that it depends, and it depends on the nature of the changes. There was one document which I had, and it was signed by Mr. Gama, sent forward. Group came back and said, we've taken out his signature, please resend the document, because they only wanted it signed, if I understand correctly, by Mr. Singh and Mr. Malefi. That's fine, thank you. That's an administrative change, or there might be a spelling correction, or one or two things. If there was a substantive change to the meaning of the document, or a flaw in the argument, or the tables, or the calculations, then it would have come back to me and they'd have said, please fix.
Now, in the event you do not agree with those substantive changes, what would happen?
This was the first time that this happened.
And I take it you did not agree with the amendments made to your proposal?
I looked at this and I must admit I was taken aback by these amendments, and I said, this will not work. When I read this revised document through all the arguments which have been through here, I said, this is not right. This is flawed. It's flawed in thinking and it's flawed in execution, was my...
Was your understanding of Ms. Ndleje's email to you in regard to these changes that all that was contemplated was that you would just effect the changes as opposed to consider them and let's hear what you have to say if you have got any views on them?
Correct. Ms. Ndleje, I sent it to me just to execute those changes and send it back to her, and that was all she contemplated.
And that's what you did?
That's what I did.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now, but at this juncture, you've applied your mind to the whole document and the changes effected, and from paragraph 44 at page 9, you state what you then did, having learnt of these significant changes made to your document.
Correct.
Please tell the chair.
If I may, as I said, I was taken back by these unilateral changes. That was the Wednesday. I'd already said as prime author I was not consulted.
Yes.
I did not know what to make of these changes. I deliberated long and hard. I slept on it. On Thursday afternoon, I emailed Mr. Garma and Mr. Gianni expressing my concern at these unilateral changes in this business case memorandum. In respect of the 19E, that it implied, reading of the revised business case, that this was changing a 19E type heavy haul locomotive to an unspecified general freight locomotive to be awarded to CSR. And that email is in Annexure 9.
And if we could go then 10 to Annexure 9, that will be at your page 216. Page 216, Chair. Thank you. Yes, we found the email.
Would you like me to read it or talk to it?
I would like you to talk to it, and if there is anything in particular you would like to read into the record, you may do so.
If I may then talk to it, because the email is in the record.
Yes.
Obviously, I didn't know what to do, and I preface this. This is a difficult email to write. And I noticed the changes, and I highlight that there was a significant risk in these changes. I point out that the changes affected Project Shongololo, and Project Shongololo was a project which Mr. Pregasin Pillay was the name which we had given to this project for the optimization of the operations on the coal line, which was dependent on standardizing these fleet with the 19E locomotives. We had just it had this name, Project Shongololo, and would have improved very many of the operational aspects of the coal line. I point out the characteristics of the 19E locomotives, the 22 tons per axle, and their power, and how they intercommunicate with each other. If I may stress and just point out that the locomotives operate in what we call a consist. Many trains. You couple a number of locomotives together to get the requisite power to haul the train. For these locomotives to operate in a consist, they need to talk to each other. They need to talk a common language over a set of wires which interconnects the locomotive. These 19E locomotives used a Toshiba T internet capability, but that just talks to the language that they spoke in the locomotives. I highlighted that this business case, as modified, did not explicitly specify the locomotive, but I used the phrase, if a current and delivered design is the criteria, then it is the 20E, because that was all we had from CSR. And then I highlighted why that locomotive would not meet the requirements, because it's a 22 ton per axle, it has less power, and it was specified as a general freight locomotive, for all those reasons. Furthermore, I highlighted the locomotives cannot interoperate with the 19E unless we achieve some standard interoperational capability, which would cost some additional amount of money. I then further went on to say that, and talked to a aspect of loco design. I said that the new locos are a COCO design, and it would have a further implication in the design and testing. I then also spoke to concerns around Transnet Engineering and their assembly of locomotives, because they had not yet produced a 20E locomotive, and this would come afterwards. Essentially, I just listed a whole range of conditions as to why this was not going to work.
And these factors you list at your paragraph 46, at page 11 of your statement.
Yes, they are highlighted in paragraph 46.
And this email is directed to Mr. Siabonga Gama and Mr. Tamsanga Gianni.
Correct.
What then transpired after you sent this email?
Later that afternoon, I got a phone call from Mr. Gianni to the effect of, why did I send this email? And I said, because these locomotives won't work. That was the substance of the conversation.
One would have thought that from the email, it's clear that you were giving them the benefit of your concerns so that they know you have certain concerns.
The exact point, Mr. Chair, the conversation did not address any of the technical or substantive points I had raised in my email. It was, and please, I paraphrase this after many years, but it's collectively burned in my memory, why did you send this email?
And what did you tell him? You should have told him, it's clear from the email, I'm expressing my concerns.
Said they won't work. And that's where the conversation effectively ended.
Yeah.
Did you receive a response to your email at page 216? A formal response to the issues you had raised?
Not from Mr. Gianni.
Did you receive a response from Mr. Gama?
Yes, I received a response from Mr. Gama, and I addressed that on
Page 11 of your statement.
Yeah.
Is it an email you received, or
No,
what did you receive
I received, it comes later, I received an SMS from Gama, and it's item para 54 on page 13. But the implications that I would, perhaps you have some things before that.
But to my question, whether you received a response by email, as you had sent out this email, from either of the recipients, the answer is no.
No email response.
Let me
formal response.
Let me go back to your last conversation, telephone conversation with Mr. Gianni. Did you have an understanding as to what the basis of his complaint was about the fact that you had sent this email to him and Mr. Gama?
Not at the time, only later, when I connected the dots.
Yes, as far as you knew then, was there anything that precluded you from sending anything directly to Mr. Gama and Mr. Gianni if you wanted to convey something? Did you have to go via somebody else or anything like that?
No, not at all. The nature of my working relationship, particularly in these business cases and the like, I had, may I say, free access to Mr. Gama, Mr. Singh, Mr. Peter, Mr. Gianni. I had free access virtually to everybody in the organization except Mr. Malefi.
Yes.
But with all the rest around the development of these business cases,
Yes.
I could phone, SMS, and or email
Yes.
directly, and my email traces
And there's
showed
never been any problem,
Never any
objection
problem with that.
expressed by Mr.
what
Gianni?
No. What I did do, if I sent perhaps a contentious email or one of concern, I would keep my direct reporting superiors informed either by copying them the email or saying, this is what happened. But I was fortunate and privileged to have that direct access.
Did you understand Mr. Gianne's objection to be about the content of your email, or to be about anything else? So if you had been communicating with him directly and with Mr. Kama directly whenever you had something to communicate and there had been no problem, why was it a problem this time? Was it about the content as you understood it?
At the time that I received the phone call, shortly after, almost very shortly after sending the email, I did not understand or have context to any reason as to why Mr. Gianni had said, why did you send that email at that time? Subsequent events, both through emails with which I was involved and the like, I came to understand why there was a concern to that email, but I did not understand his telephone call to me at the time.
Yes.
At the time of his call,
Yes. Yes.
strange phone call. What's strange phone call? Don't understand why. What's wrong? It's
Yes.
that's the reality. Why are you complaining about it?
Yes.
Please, I'm paraphrasing, but that's really was my sentiment at the time. What's wrong?
Will that be dealt with later?
I was going to say, Chair, it
Yes.
appears like it's drawn to my attention we are encroaching on your lunch break, so perhaps we'll address those issues after lunch.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
If we may break for lunch. If that suits you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll take the lunch adjournment now, and we will resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.